always used to lay you clean up the messes. Down on my knees, thought I couldn't stand up on my own. Turns out sometimes you're stronger alone.
Hello, my name is Taylor. I'm 35 years old. I was a Jehovah's Witness and I am shunned.
All right, Taylor. So, how did you come to be one of Jehovah's Witnesses in the first place?
I was born privileged to be and underprivileged to be a Jehovah's Witness. My mom was born and raised herself as well. My grandparents were both Jehovah's Witnesses. I believe their parents, I think, even were. So it went back generations with my mom. So the majority of her family is all Jehovah's Witnesses. And my dad converted after they got married. So,
Okay.
so I was my whole life. I think I was like 8 months old when my dad got baptized. So we have photos of him holding me as a baby on his baptism day. So it was definitely from the beginning of my life, that was everything I knew.
That's interesting. The beginning of your life, and it sounds like the beginning of a different life to some degree for your dad. Was your mom an super active witness when she met your dad?
Not when they met. She had left, I want to say, in maybe like her early 20s, late teens, early 20s. She got disfellowshipped, got married to someone else, was very unhappy in that relationship and got divorced. And she started kind of hanging out in this town. She's from Canada, and she would cross the border and go, party kind of outside of where people who knew her could see her. And that's where she met my dad, out dancing in a bar. And so they dated for a bit, decided to get married, which was something that my mom always had a lot of shame talking about their wedding. They had like this video, like VHS video, and when I was little, I always wanted to watch it. I wanted to watch their wedding, but she would like hide it from me. She didn't want us to see it because they didn't get married in a kingdom hall. None of her family came to the wedding. It was like all my dad's family there. And so she had a lot of shame about the way their relationship started. So that was kind of set a bit of a tone about like what was to be celebrated and what was to be mourned. And she was very ashamed of the fact that they met outside of the truth, but they dated, got married, and then my mom was contacted, I think, in the street witnessing right before as they were kind of thinking about having a kid. And so I think the timing in, realizing that she was wanting to have kids and was feeling guilty about having left. And I think that like externalization of knowing that you're going to be raising another human brought her conscience back to her. So she started studying and got my dad to start studying as well. And at first, I think he just accepted the study I think he was in his mind, he was going to prove it wrong and try to talk my mom out of going back. So my dad's a scientist, like he's a chemical engineer. He's got his master's, like he's super smart.
Yeah, he's intelligent.
He's an intelligent person, which is strange that he ended up in a cult, but
It shows it's not a matter of intelligence, is it?
True. Vulnerability is definitely more
it's
of
usually a lack of emotional intelligence or vulnerability in a situation.
Yeah. They told my dad his SAT scores were humanly impossible because his math scores were so high and his English scores were so low that he must have been able to read the questions on the math side to even get them right. So like, how did you? So we used to chuckle about that growing up, but you know, as I've gotten older, I kind of recognize that kind of like that lack of emotional intelligence, and also maybe some struggling with like the depth of language. So it might be a little bit easier to really absorb what truth is, kind of that critical thinking, critical reading skill. And he always said that the thing that convinced him was the brother that he was studying with let my dad bring one of his coworkers to a study, because the coworker was like, I'm going to prove him wrong. Sit me down. We're going to talk about evolution. And so he brought him to the study. My dad just like sat back, and the guy just like, he like lost his cool, right? And the brother that was studying with him stayed really calm and collected, and like didn't hardcore argue, and just like maintained his ground. And my dad always said that was the moment that he knew it was the truth, was because like the brother was able to just stay so calm. So I think that really reflects kind of his core value, is less about is it really truth and more about like, I like the way this looks and feels. So
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great summation of that. Because it wasn't about the facts there. It was about the demeanor and how things were presented. How things were presented, maybe even more than what was being presented. And, you know, there's
exactly.
many reasons that people become Jehovah's Witnesses. It's community, it's things that sound good and they want something that sounds good to them. It, you know, people are love bombing them and they're in a vulnerable state. There's just lots of things that are more than just like the doctrine or the truth, as they call it, that get people into that scenario and get them reeled in and baptized. Um,
Yep.
hmm. And I'm sure that
Yeah, I
plays out throughout the story too, just who your dad is to some degree.
definitely. Yeah, he definitely dealt with some abandonment issues as a kid, with his parents getting divorced and his dad not really being physically present as much as he would have liked. And my mother, you know, being raised in it, she was also the youngest in a very large family that didn't have a lot of money. Both parents worked. So, you know, she always talked about how like her and her next oldest sister would always like basically get dressed like twins. And even though they were different ages, like I think she just felt like she was never really allowed to have her own identity. Nobody really cared because she was just kind of like there, another mouth to feed. It was like all girls and one boy. So, you know, got a bunch of Jehovah's Witness girls. It's like there's unfortunately it doesn't, that ends up not equating to a whole lot of value in the eyes of the Jehovah's Witness community. So I think she started off with like she has very low self-esteem, and I don't think anyone was very present for her emotions. So she really struggles with emotional regulation, which yeah, as the story goes on, that's definitely been a pattern in my life, is not knowing how to emotionally regulate for myself all the time, but recognizing that that was because my mom couldn't do it for herself. And so
Well, sure, we often don't have that modeled, or you know, maybe there is some sort of a trait that is being passed down to some degree at times, whatever the
yeah,
case may be. But as it's interesting always to humanize the people that, and it's important really to humanize the people that were the foundation for our exposure to the cult of Jehovah's Witnesses. Um, Going back and humanizing you, you know, being a person who's growing up in this and in this environment, um, what was the worldview that it gave you as a little kid growing up? How did you see the world around you and yourself?
There was definitely a lot of fear that my mom tried to very heavily instill in me. She, especially my mom, but my dad too. Um, my mom definitely like latched on to the like satanic panic of the 80s and was terrified of demons and demonic things and demon activity and spiritism and um just I mean, she would constantly be telling stories about, oh, I heard a story about this sister who brought home a mirror from a thrift store and it possessed her. And now like now you can't go thrift store shopping because what if you bring demons into the house? And I'm pretty sure she burned my Aladdin VHS, which she bought me, which this is kind of the funny part.
Yeah, mom giveth and mom taketh away.
Yeah. And like burning plastic. I was like, this is bad.
Yeah.
Um, there were a lot of extreme examples. She would burn things often if she was scared of them. The cleansing power of fire, and they wonder why I I like ritual and demonic imagery now. It's pretty funny. So yeah, I was very. I think because of that environment, I was very intrigued and fascinated by everything kind of like scary and ominous. And also, like, I was born in 1988, and the Revelation book and the Insight books were published in 88. And I think it was the Mankind's Search for God was in 1990. So those were like pretty fresh books when I was really young. And so we studied them a few times while I was growing up, and specifically the Revelation book and the Mankind Search for God book. And those had the best paintings in them. Like all like the Mankind Search for God had like this Buddhist painting of depiction of hell with all these like really cool demon guys like pitchforking people and their like tongues coming out of their mouths. And I would just, I was like 3, 4, 5 years old, just sitting there, through the whole meeting, just fascinated by all of that imagery, like the four horsemen in the Revelation book and like the beasts. And then when the Daniel book came out, I was like so stoked. So I was very, I was very interested in like the deeper things and fascinated by all of that because I think it also, my mom created so much fear around that kind of imagery, and like the religion made me feel like I had some power over that fear. So I wasn't like afraid of it. I was kind of interested because I so trusted that like Jehovah was going to protect me when it really came down to it. So I was like, I want to learn about all of the dark things. So it kind
Wow.
of
So let me see if I got this straight. So for you, because I'm often talking to people who saw the pictures of the demons and were terrified, right? And felt powerless against them. For you, seeing those images and seeing them as these powerful creatures, but here you are with the most powerful creature at your behest. You felt more empowered and were interested in them because they weren't scary to you.
exactly. And
Wow.
yeah, it like very much because I also very much held the responsibility of like the privilege of being born into the right religion. It just blew my mind as a kid. Like, how out of like the billions of people in the world, how did I just plop out in the right place? Like, how that's not even fair. So I would take it so seriously, like other people's lives were so serious to me. And I think I would stare at and be so engaged with those images of like all these people dying. And it's what kind of built this um like fearlessness of speaking to people about it, because it was so real to me that that was something that we were all going to face. And like, I could be courageous if it was going to save people from that. And so I was definitely like a pretty tenacious kid. I was not afraid to talk about it. Like in like the first week in kindergarten, I mean, I had this recognition. Like, I remember the first week sitting around and being like, because this is my first time really exposed to non-Jehovah's Witness kids. And I'm just like, I was consumed by the idea of like, if Armageddon comes tomorrow and I don't witness to all of them, like, I'm going to have to clean up their dead bodies. And I'm starting to like these kids, and I don't want that to happen. So I brought tracks, the Live Forever and What Will Happen When You Die or whatever tracks, and stuffed them in everybody's cubbies like the first week of school. And then all of the parents called my parents and got really, really mad. And then the teacher hated me and would like way over discipline me because she didn't like that I was a witness. So yeah, that was an interesting start, but I felt very responsible for everyone. So definitely turned me into a bit of a people pleaser.
Sure. I mean, I I think it's common for us. We were all given a savior complex to some degree, right? We were all told that if we just went out with the right message and we preached it to people diligently, that we were going to save all of these individuals, and really the responsibility was ours lest we be blood guilty. So it was very much on us. Even as a little kid, you were feeling the pressure to save your little playmates at kindergarten, which, I mean, were you 5 in kindergarten? You shouldn't be worried about the end of the world. You should just be playing with your playmates.
Yeah.
5-year-olds don't need that kind of pressure.
Yeah. It's funny because up until, well, I've been out for about 10 years. And when I first left, I very much, when people would ask me, I'd say, oh, I was raised a Jehovah's Witness. They'd be like, what was it like growing up? And my narrative was consistently like, well, I had a great childhood. Like, it wasn't really until like puberty that things got bad. And I realized at a certain point that I was kind of gaslighting myself out of like really acknowledging that there was a lot more covert abusive behavior when I was younger, and that like their methods of indoctrination sometimes were incredibly unhealthy. Like the Nazi Germany videos that the Jehovah's Witnesses put out, like I was obsessed with those. Like I read everything I possibly could about the Holocaust because I felt also that responsibility to like to really empathize with the tragedy part of it and identify with like thinking that I'm going to face the same thing in the future. It just felt like an inevitability to me. And the way it was presented, I mean, at that time period too, the propaganda that was being put out was like, it's fun. I look back at those videos, specifically the Nazi ones, Purple Triangle and Stand Firm, something was one of them. And then there was the To Ends of the Earth, the Gilead video. And then there was the organization behind the name, the one with like the cool Bethel scene where you like watch all the printing process and you like follow a box down all the path and everything. I was obsessed. Like my parents loved it because I would be sitting there watching like Nazi exploitation propaganda instead of watching cartoons. So they were like stoked. Um, and I recently rewatched the organization behind their name because I found it on YouTube. And I was like, wow, so much of my personality is like kind of founded in the, like, I love physical arts and paper and bookbinding and printing, and like, you know, they talk a lot about language. I did sign language. Like, there's so many parts of that that propaganda that really influenced my childhood. And so while I have an affinity for like who I am and the things that it created that I enjoy in life and the things that I'm fascinated by, like, I still very much like dark imagery. I still, you know, like researching historical things, and doing physical art. But it's interesting to see where it came from, and have to also acknowledge that like a lot of that is founded on like indoctrinating children with propaganda, and there's a negative to that part too.
Well, sure. When you're doing it as an adult because you're choosing to of your own volition, and it's not being used against you as some sort of propaganda, that's just called research. You know, that's normal. But when you're a kid and being exposed to this, and just for anyone listening who wasn't one of Jehovah's Witnesses, Jehovah's Witnesses believe that eventually there's going to be a great tribulation that will occur before Armageddon, that in that great tribulation, Jehovah's Witnesses will likely be thrown into the equivalent of Nazi concentration camps because religion will be banned. But we as witnesses, we're going to, you know, press forward, and then we'll stand out like a sore thumb. And then here the governments will come and throw us all into camps. And we were taught that from the time we were little children, that we had to expect that at any day we could be ripped from our parents and thrown into camps. That's messed up. You don't teach kids that. And I remember when my wife and I got married, sometime I think in the first year, my wife had grown up very isolated and sheltered, no TV or anything. And I had seen Schindler's List before. And I was like, you need to watch this movie. Like, this is something that is going to happen to us. And I love you, sweetie, but you're super naive. And like, you don't know what the real world is like. And you need to watch this because this is how it is, right? Because I believed all the garbage that I had been taught, and that this was what my life was going to culminate in, some sort of great tribulation. And then you learn later in life, recently went to the St. Louis Holocaust Museum, that while every life lost is tragic, there were 1,500 Jehovah's Witnesses that lost their lives. All this puffery around what they did in the Holocaust. And if you're a witness and you can go to a Holocaust museum and walk out thinking it's all about you, that just shows how narcissistic this thing is, because there were 1,500 of you. There were like, was it 5 million Jewish people, and like hundreds of thousands of the, I can't remember, the gypsy people, the Romani or something, I'm blanking on the name, and people of color, and people in the LGBTQ community, particularly gay men, and just all these other people who were brutally slaughtered. And you all were we were such a minor, well, they were such a minor part of that thing. And yet they used that propaganda to the utmost height to stoke fear into little kids. That's super messed up.
Yeah, I mean, like, co-opting that story and exploiting other
Avoiding their
people's
pain.
tragedy, yeah, is like pretty gross.
Yeah.
But I will say effective.
Very. I was a grown man, like, we gotta watch Schindler's List, sweetie, because this is us.
Oh yeah, I mean, yeah, especially a lot of the stuff now, that all the videos they're making with like lots of imagery of like guards coming in with big guns into the kingdom hall, and like, take it's, that whole kind of myth of martyrdom and persecution of, playing the victim so that you kind of get to go under the radar. It's
Well,
definitely
yeah.
effective.
And again, Jehovah's Witnesses didn't even have to be the victims in that. I mean, first of all, you can read the letters that Rutherford was sending to Hitler and how he was antagonizing Hitler and probably caused a lot of the problems for Jehovah's Witnesses. But then, they could have just signed a piece of paper and left, and they wouldn't do it, which shows the power of that indoctrination. They feared something bigger than the Nazis,
Exactly.
and that was
Yeah.
shunning and their God.
Amen. Yeah. So yeah, all of that was definitely very fascinating to me. Very motivating. I did a lot of like book reports on Jehovah's Witness literature in school. Um, I was kind of, I mean, I found ways to like socially blend in a decent amount, and I kind of did the thing to kind of like avoid the fact that I couldn't get really close to any one kid or one group of kids. I would kind of happily just like bounce around and be friends with like everyone. And so I never, because it was like everything was like I'm friends with everyone, but they're just surface relationships, then I didn't feel as, I tried to protect my feelings about like then not getting invited to birthday parties or like having to say no when I got invited. It helped me feel like, well, I'm not fully attached to anyone anyway. So I definitely created a lot of like coping mechanisms around the way things had to be, like, having to leave the classroom when there was a birthday party, or they're going to watch Nightmare Before Christmas or something. And that was my signal to go hang out in the library by myself. But I learned to love that time and to enjoy being by myself. I kind of thought it was cool because, like, in a way, they were all doing the same thing, and I got to do something different. And so that's how I kind of made peace with it. I definitely created a lot of my personality around the way I was raised. So a lot of coping mechanisms, but they helped me survive. So I'm grateful for them.
Oh yeah. I mean, they get you through the moments. The problem is that some of those coping mechanisms that evolved during childhood become the problems that we face as adults because they're maladaptive to some degree. We have no power, and we're just making the most of a bad situation, really. But yeah, those are the things. Feeling special, right? That's also part of that's part of being one of Jehovah's Witnesses, is feeling unique, feeling special, feeling like, yeah, those other people are doing their thing, but like I'm very counter that culture and I get to go over here and be special and unique with,
Hmm.
8 million others um in the cult. But it makes you feel very unique at the time, and like you are special and you are chosen. And
Hmm.
we were all just trying to make the best of it. That's what other option is there? I mean, some people unfortunately also felt the everyday misery of it too. But a lot of us, I think,
Yeah.
kind of got like a I don't know the word I'm thinking for, but like a well, let's just make the most of whatever we have, which can be a good thing, but also can keep you stuck in very bad things at times.
Yeah. I mean, I got extremely skilled at gaslighting myself out of my own emotions.
Mhm.
And I didn't have parents who were very present for my emotions either, and were not very good at regulating their own emotions. So it was just easier to like n- not allow them to exist essentially, and just force them away. Like, like having to get up on Saturday mornings and, knock on potentially your classmates' doors while they're in their pajamas with their friends after a sleepover watching cartoons and eating Eggos. Like, I tried to make it like, and there were definitely like a lot of those reinforcements of like praise for being so remarkably young and diligent and mature and studious and engaged. Like, I learned that there were a lot of rewards for being able to communicate well with adults and being in adult spaces, especially like, even though my dad got baptized when I was born, I really can't remember a time where he was not an elder. So he moved up in the hierarchy very quickly after he converted. And I think that community was something that was lacking in his life before. He didn't really feel, I don't think, like he had too much of a place in the world, especially with people. And I think it made him feel very needed and appreciated. And so I would tag along with him like as much as I possibly could. Like, because also, I mean, the limitations that they put on the achievements that women can make in the cult are so different than a man's trajectory. And culturally, there's so much segregation. Like, going out in service, like, more often than not, they're going to group sisters together and brothers together. And when the sisters talk, it's called gossip. And when the brothers talk, it's called like taking care of responsibility, because they have the power. So what they talk about is powerful, but women don't have the power. And so what they talk about is just fluff. And so from a young age, I mean, I had a recognition that I was a girl and that I was never going to be able to achieve the things that men could achieve. But I very much wanted a male responsible role in the congregation. Like, I would, like, play meeting with my stuffed animals and my little brother. But like, I always gave the man's talks. Like, I would prepare them and give like 30-minute talks to my stuffed animals, because I knew that I was just as capable, if not more capable, as like a child than some of these men. And so I would like, try to get in with my dad as much as possible. Like, if I could go in his car group with all the brothers, that's what I was going to do, because then also I got to hear all the juicy stuff, and because I was such a well-behaved kid, because I learned, keep your mouth shut, keep your head down, be really responsible, then you get to hear and be a part of more things. And that's definitely something I carried with me through my Jehovah's Witness career, was kind of this, like, even though there were a lot of obvious limitations with my gender, I would try to push as much into like pushing the boundaries as much as possible, because I wanted to achieve. And I looked up to my dad and I wanted to like follow in his footsteps, which was hilarious, because then when my brother was born, my dad so desperately wanted my brother to like all the and have that father-son relationship, and my brother just was not about it. So then I think I became kind of a default, because I recognized like my brother's not even interested, so like if I show extra interest, then I'll get chosen more. But I always knew that I was never going to be the default. I knew that, yeah, that limitation was always going to be there. And then it only gets worse as you get older, and then puberty hits and everything changes.
It's really sad, just picturing a little 6-year-old girl who just wants to be like daddy, and do the things, it's daddy daughter day at work or something. And fathers can take their daughters to work and show them whatever they do or whatever. And here you're wanting to do the things your dad does. You're looking up to him, and you will never be able to, simply by the nature of the body you were born in, which is just ridiculous. And it's really all the unrealized, unfulfilled dreams. I guess in the end, it's good that you weren't able to do some of those things. It saved you in some ways, maybe, but also it's not good for your self-worth or self-esteem. Or as a woman, I remember my wife one day was talking about, there was a video of there was a school bus or something, and the bus driver passed out at the wheel, and a little boy ran up there and like kind of hit the brakes and took care of the situation. And the little boy was being hailed as a little hero and everything. It was very cool. But my wife Jenny was just saying, as a little girl, I would have never even thought of doing that because it's not my place. I should let a little boy go up there and do it, because who am I as a girl to do anything? And that's just really sad, to hamstring all of, half the population because of your archaic, patriarchal, misogynistic society. And but that's really what they do. And you are just, as you're talking, you were fearless. You seem to kind of care about everybody, and really were
Yeah.
very sincere. And then that's going to make that sincerely hurt when you're not allowed to do all the things, self-express the way you want to, in a way, even to try to help other people. You're not allowed to do that as a woman. Allow me to break in here for a second. This channel is made possible by you, the listener. If you appreciate what we're doing here, please consider supporting at patreon.com/shunned, or leave a review on iTunes or other platforms. Like and subscribe. All those things help the channel. If you're looking for merch, you can go get some Shun swag from the shunnedpodcast.com website, or reach out there to be on the show. If you're looking for more ex-Jehovah's Witness content, I'll recommend my first podcast called This JW Life. You can find that on podcast apps as well as YouTube. And if you're feeling stuck in life, struggling to find happiness and community, maybe you're haunted by the past, beating yourself up, unsure of who you are or what you even want out of life now that you've lost this one identity that was given to you by a cult, reach out through my other sites like exjwhelp.com, that's exjwhelp.com, or storyworkscoaching.com, and let's see about working together to help you find a life that fits you and who you are, maybe for the first time ever. And now, back to our guest.
Yeah, there were so many times where I felt like in the moment there had to be like this show of putting me in my place. Like my dad used to be one of the school conductors for the theocratic ministry school in the back school. And so I started giving talks when I was like 5 years old. And those ones my mom would write the whole script, and the sister would come over and practice a bunch of times with me at the house before the date, and we'd be so prepared. And then the very first talk I ever wrote myself, I didn't let anyone read it before I gave it. And I wrote like pages. It was like a whole talk. And I had so many scriptures, and I was so proud of my arguments and my reasoning. And so my dad was the service conductor, and I went 8 minutes. So 5 is supposed to be the limit. And I went 3 minutes over, and my dad did let me finish my talk. Like they had the bell.
Oh, I know, because I was the one
me.
who had to ring the bell a lot of times.
Oh, the bell. They just fuck you up. But I was so determined I was like, I wrote this myself. I couldn't stop. It was just like, no, I deserve to finish what I have to say. Like, so I took up the whole 8 minutes. Oh man, he ripped into me. You'd think, like, I think I was like 8 years old, maybe 7. Like, you'd think dad would at least be kind of kind and silly about it. And he wailed into me. And then what was it? You got either a G for good, W for work, or wasn't there a third one if you just like completely failed? Like, long time ago. They changed it eventually.
S for shunning. They just went ahead and shunned you right there. Oh, I don't know what the other one was. I remember
You're
the G
out.
and the W's. I'm sure somebody can put in the comments what it is. I can't remember.
Yeah, because you had your counsel point and you had to like do a good enough job
Maybe there's
to
like
move
do it
on.
again, like to repeat on it or
The
something.
W would be like work, like you
Yeah.
need to work on this one again. But I feel like there was another one that was just like
I think you
bad.
might be
It
right.
was like B for
Yeah.
bad. I don't remember, but he gave me the lowest score. And I was just so like, how could you? Like, I will go and listen to your talks and you're going to cut me off in mine. And, the 5 minutes, that's like the most you can do as a woman.
Mhm.
So, yeah, I was definitely put in my place for pushing those boundaries. But, from an early age, I always knew in my heart that, like, that I was a feminist. And the first time I called myself a feminist to my mother, she slapped me across the face. That was not okay with her. And yeah, I inherently knew that there wasn't anything different. And I remember a sister when I was young, I divulged to her, like, I don't understand like how God could create two genders and put one above the other. That just seems so unloving to me. And if he is love and I'm feeling unloved by this, there's got to be something wrong here. And her reasoning was, well, we know over time, God continues to reveal truths. And the thing about men is that they can't handle the full truth. They need to feel like they're in charge, and it creates a balance in the organization, because if women were equally in charge, men just wouldn't do enough. So God knows that that's what men need. And so we have to give them that space because we know that we're more capable than them, but they don't know that. And it was like the worst thing to tell a kid.
Wow. I mean, let's be fair here. God didn't create women. He forgot.
Exactly. It was an afterthought. Like, oh
To be like,
shit,
Adam had to
how's
be like,
this
hey man, like
reproduction gonna work?
I'm all alone here. I Genesis chapter 1 said that you created us to propagate the species, but here I am in Genesis chapter 2, and I don't even have a wife.
And I'm watching all these animals around me fucking, and what am I supposed to do?
So what am I supposed to do here, man? You put me in a bad spot. But it's also, oh my gosh, I mean, it's also ridiculous. It's so sad that the pitting of each other against each other, and just the fact that you knew you weren't going to be able to do things as a female Jehovah's Witness, and they hear your own dad is really showing, and it's not just your dad. I mean, I'm sure he had this trait maybe, but from some of the things you said there earlier, but most Jehovah's Witnesses, they treat children like little adults instead of seeing you as a little kid who just wrote her first talk and is just so proud of this. They have to crush you and let you know that you did not meet the adult standards. And I mean, not only could it have been because you were a girl, but I mean, I've seen them do it to boys too. It's just like you didn't meet the adult standards, and we're all the same here. You can't be a kid here. You have to be an adult.
Yeah. And I was a pretty tenacious kid, and I was a little fiery. I was really
Yeah.
into dancing, and I was, super creative and always wanting to be engaged and involved in things. And, I also had my devilish side where I liked to kind of push back at things, and I would almost kind of taunt, like my mom or something, to kind of get more out of her. I was definitely a pusher, which is why, my brother was born 4.5 years when I was 4.5 years old. And I think we actually talked recently, and from an early age, he was able to kind of witness how difficult life was for me because I was so engaged and so um involved and willing to push back, that, I mean, he saw me get the shit kicked out of me. I mean, my parents would really, the spankings were intense for me because I would start off very obstinate and like, you think you're going to get a rise out of me from hitting me? And that would just make them more angry. So I'd kind of stoke them and like push them to increase the punishment. And my brother was really smart and watched that and was like, I'm not going to do what she's doing. I'm going to recede. He was like, in the meetings, if you just looked at him like he was doing something wrong, he'd just like cower and just start crying. Cause then, like, who's going to hit a crying kid already? Like, he definitely he got away with it. And I think that was also kind of, in a sad way, kind of part of their preference for him in a way, because he was willing to just, I mean, what it turned into was him putting it all away and like having to kind of just not share himself with them and not be open and kind of recede himself. And so I feel like his experience was a lot more lonely because of that. And, that makes me sad, but I'm also in a way grateful that I almost feel like I kind of shielded him from the stuff I got because I just like became big and like the distraction. And so then it could kind of allow him to have less pressure put on him because, I was almost 5 when he was born. I was there. I was little. Like, he was my best friend from the time I was super young. And we definitely found a lot of like support with each other, which was great. But um,
It's really
yeah.
sad because it sounds like ultimately he was more controllable and was then seen as preferential. Though he was controllable. You can't control someone's internal game necessarily. So he was just choking everything down, it sounds like. But now I was thinking about just the nature of, if you're a parent and you're spanking your kid and that kid isn't giving you the reaction that you want. And so, you're wanting to control that kid. So you elevate now I'm going to become even bigger because I'm going to show you that I'm in control. Who's the one really controlling this? Because the kid is punking you at every level and making you do things that you maybe wouldn't ordinarily have done. You don't have the control you think you do.
Hmm.
And also, it's just kind of like, I don't know, obviously abusive and sad that it ever has to get to any of that to that degree in the first place. Like,
Yeah.
it should have never had to go there.
Yeah. And I mean, it created a really unhealthy dynamic because they would feel so guilty about how escalated and out of control. Because, once again, they didn't have a whole lot of emotional intelligence or like emotional regulation. So I would increase their dysregulation. And then they had to deal with the guilt and shame because they ultimately loved me. And like, as best that they can, they love me. And I know that they didn't want to beat the shit out of their kid. I could tell they didn't enjoy the process. But then they would feel that guilt, and then I knew that after the pain would then come the coddling and the being held. That was like, if my mom was going to like hold me and rock me, it was going to be after I was spanked. And so I mean, even what that creates is an unhealthy dynamic that even later when I have disagreements with a partner, sometimes I find myself like almost trying to taunt and escalate because I'm looking for comfort, and that's how I learned to soothe with another person. And so
Well, yeah, and I will say though that you didn't push them to escalate it. They're the adults. They escalated it.
yeah,
You were the child, and you
well, and
can't
maybe that was me trying to feel like I had some control in it
sure,
too.
sure, and you
Yeah.
can't make them dysregulated. They were dysregulated. And at the end of the day, do you know how many people that I work with in my coaching practice who or stories that have been told on here, or I mean, I've seen it personally myself. If you have to, if you're beating the crap out of your kids and then wanting to play afterward or coddle them afterward or whatever the case may be, I mean, that is like the ultimate gaslighting. That is so terrible. I have just tried to make you feel like a pile of crap, and now I'm going to confuse you and try to like build you back up on the back side of it. And it's all about the parents trying to assuage their own feelings, and it's so confusing to children. If you're doing that to your child, maybe you need to get help for why you are becoming so dysregulated, and then putting all that on your child and confusing your child with these absolute mind fucks of mixed messaging coming one right after the other, right? And it's so sad. And a lot of witness kids really had to endure that because life in that environment is about control, and it's about authority. And I have to let you know that I am the authority and that I have the control here. And then afterward, yeah, maybe they do feel bad about how far they took it, but then that's how far they took it. No kid made them take it that far.
Yeah, and then it ultimately just teaches you that abuse is love,
Yes, all the
which
trauma
is
bonding.
which is just like, yeah, all of the emotional dysregulation, the weird avoidant and, inconsistent attachment style, plus teaching that abuse is love makes for, a very confusing childhood. So I definitely I made the best of an often bad situation. But I do feel like in a lot of ways, my experience has built a lot of resiliency. So even though I
Well,
wouldn't
you built
wish,
resiliency.
yeah, yes, yes. Yeah, I did.
Yeah, you did that.
I did that. Yeah. It's so in a way I have gratitude for those experiences, even though they were difficult. But I also, I've and in my adulthood, I've worked with kids. I worked with children for like 14 years as a nanny. I taught preschool and outdoor pre-K, and especially with outdoor pre-K, I mean, you don't have a lot of tools to use to discipline. Like, you don't have walls even to like put a kid in a corner or sequester them to a table. Like, you're just out playing in nature. And I mean, it taught me so much about how much your personal emotional regulation and your ability to stay calm and like, and also have dignified perspective of children, and seeing them as like whole people that are just young and inexperienced and are deserving of quality guidance. Like, when you take that physical discipline like the even ability to do it off of the table, it forces you to be a lot more engaged with yourself and a lot more creative with how you interact with kids. So I feel like through doing that work, I definitely healed a lot of those wounds that I got as a kid from all of that. But yeah, I can recognize that, like, in a lot of ways, I really had a good relationships with my parents. We did spend a lot of time together. We went on a lot of cool vacations. We like did a lot of game nights, like their anniversary every year. They basically treated like Christmas. And so we do like a scavenger hunt for presents around the house. And a lot of times we got to like, my mom and I would cook like a really beautiful meal, or we'd go out to a nice place. We did a lot of celebrating, and we did enjoy spending time together. So there was a lot of positive in those relationships. I just, yeah, I wish that they could have found a more supportive community to help them in raising their kids than Jehovah's Witnesses. Jehovah's Witnesses were a rough choice for that. I wish they could have found some place that would have supported them better and helped them learn better emotional regulation for themselves. Because I've also seen them suffer in all this too. None of this has been comfortable for them either. So yeah, it's not good for anybody.
Yeah, it's a pressure cooker. Jehovah's Witnesses are.
Yeah.
So so you mentioned just briefly school. Did you go through regular public school, or were you homeschooled at some point, or?
I went all to regular public school.
And was school, I know you were worried about the kids in kindergarten, but did you make friends as you went through school? Were you a witness? You know, because some witness kids are like, well, I've got friends at the Kingdom Hall, can't have friends at school. Were you a person, and I guess I'll ask in both cases, were you finding friends at school and at the Kingdom Hall?
Yeah, I never had a hard time making friends. You know, my parents are both pretty verbal, and, you know, spending so much time with adults when I was young, you know, I was maybe a little weird, but um, I was pretty good at social stuff. And so, kind of like I mentioned earlier, I did a lot of like floating around different little groups and was kind of like, um, you know, a social butterfly in that I never really landed very long. And that kind of protected my feelings of feeling excluded from things. But you know, so I was friendly with people at school, but no, didn't really spend time with them. My parents, even the kids, there were like a couple kids that lived down the street from us when we moved to California, and it was pretty rare that, like, I was definitely not allowed to go in their houses. Sometimes we could like maybe ride bikes at the same time on the street as long as I didn't go too far. That was about as close. Or if there was like a school project and I had to go to another kid's house, sometimes I was allowed to do that. And man, I would take advantage of, like, I remember this one time, like having like this jumping on the bed party with like this girl in my class. I was so excited. I got to go to her house and just like feel like a normal kid. We put Smash Mouth on. Like,
R.I.P. The lead singer.
I know. Like, that was definitely, I think that was like fourth grade, you know. That was so I waited for those small moments, and then I feel like I learned how to be very present in them and just like take full opportunity to appreciate just like the feeling of normalcy, because I knew it was fleeting. But I did make friends with other Jehovah's Witness kids. There was, so when I was 8, we moved from Philadelphia to the Bay Area. And so I was a new kid all over again. And the first year I was there, I was in third grade. And nobody at my school was a Jehovah's Witness, and nobody in my congregation was in my age group. So that first year was really lonely. I mostly just hung out with my brother. And then the next year, I found a girl that was in the other congregation that went to our Kingdom Hall, who was in, because I switched schools that year. And so she was in a different class, but same school, and in the congregation next to me. So it was like, I found a friend, like, oh, and like, so, we deemed ourselves best friends, right? Because it's like the only option. And we had fun, but like, she was very mean to me. And I mean, I can acknowledge that like a lot of our personalities were shaped by the religion that we were raised in. So I can't fully hold all of it against her, because I feel like if she had been raised in a different circumstance, she probably would have not been this terrible. But like everything was just like a competition, which, they do that, especially to girls. There's only so much space in the very little space for women. And so to be like the best commenter, or, the best little kid, was like, there's only so much space. So she was very competitive, even when it came to negative things. Like if I had just had the flu and was feeling terrible, like she had a way worse flu that lasted way longer. Like she always had to triple up anything that was mine. And she would just like say terribly mean things to me. And like I'd go over to her house and she'd just like play video games for like 6 hours. And I'd be like, let's do stuff. And she's just like, no, I want to do what I want to do. I'm like, why am I even here? But then I'd just be stuck there and have to like hang out and watch her.
Well, it's the
And
only
that was
friend you
not
can
fun.
have, right?
That's the thing, is it
Which
was
kind of
also
teaches
like,
us to be in relationships with people who are unavailable in many ways, and to continue to stick it out.
yep. Yeah. So we were paired together from fourth grade on. And then once I got a little bit older, I did make another friend with a girl that was like 4 years older than me in our congregation. Because of the 4-year age difference, when we were younger, that age gap was like a lot bigger and we didn't really have much in common. But once I was headed towards like high school, then we had a lot more in common. Like I was doing a lot of like auxiliary pioneering, and our families were also super close. My parents and her parents got really close, and we were doing a lot as families together. So she became kind of my other best friend, but was 4 years older. So, stuff in our life didn't match up quite as the same as the other friend and I. So I kind of had these two friendships that were like my main friendships. And there were other, a range of Jehovah's Witness kids in the local congregations. Most of them were older than me. So as I got older, I had more friends naturally. But when I was younger, there were less options.
So, were there any events that you wanted to make sure that you brought up? Let's say, like, when did you get baptized? How old were you?
I got baptized when I was 14.
14. Okay. So before that, were there any seminal moments or events that you wanted to make sure to talk about before we got to baptism?
Not really. I mean, yeah, I feel like a lot of it was kind of that childhood
Sure.
stuff. And then, yeah, I just stayed pretty tenacious. I'd be on, loved going to the assemblies, loved going to the conventions, super engaged with it all. I was a good little Jehovah's Witness girl. I never really did anything wrong until after I got baptized.
Well, I mean, let's face it. It's for most of us, getting baptized it occurs sometimes either late childhood, early teenagerdom. And so as we get more independence, that might be when other things start to happen. So you got baptized, you said at 14. What led up to that? Was that your decision? Was that something because it sounds like you're very sincere about all this. Was it just something that you were wanting to do at that time, or were you feeling pressured?
I mean, there's, of course, the community pressure, and, all of the talks consistently that are like, if you're not baptized, you should be thinking about it. What's holding you back? So there was definitely that community pressure. But I took it very seriously. And so I probably could have gotten baptized younger. Like they would have let me. Um, but I kind of held off. I held out till the grand old age of 14, such an elder, um, to to really make sure for myself that that was what felt right to me. And the brothers were very aware of how seriously I was taking it. So when I asked, they were like, "Fantastic, yeah, you're a shoo-in, basically."
We've been waiting for this.
Yeah, and they're just like, "Oh my goodness, you're going to be able to do so much." Um, so yeah, that's how that happened.
Okay.
It's like it's not coercion, but it was coercion.
Of
It's
course, of course.
I chose it, but I only chose it because I knew that that was. I mean, I also didn't want to die in Armageddon.
Well, not only
So
that, but it's also the only path that you had to choose, right? What other path could you have chosen? What were you exposed to? Where
yeah,
were you told that there were other options other than dying at Armageddon, right? So,
yeah.
yeah, of course you're going to play into that.
hmm
Did
And I wanted
you
to pioneer. So
there you go. So were you one who went straight from getting baptized to like maybe auxiliary pioneering during the summer?
I did do it a little, but I got a little distracted right after, of course. And I just, you have to chuckle because they always tell you, the moment you get baptized, Satan's gonna come for you and he's gonna tempt you. And that was the summer that I started playing guitar, and I went to the same guitar instructor as my older friend's younger brother, who was a year older than me in school. He was gorgeous and he was weird and offbeat, and yeah, he played guitar. And so I was like, "Ooh, yeah." So I started playing guitar too, and because our families were really close, we did a lot of like dinners together, and he would always bring his guitar and like sit downstairs and practice. And so once I started playing guitar, then I would go downstairs and practice together with him. We even did a couple duets um, for our like guitar recitals. Um, it's pretty nerdy. We get together after school. Sometimes that was like my parents let me go to his house after school and practice guitar and do homework when I was in high school. So yeah, we started crushing on each other at that point, and so it did start changing my motivation a little bit. I was a little less like, oh my goodness, Jehovah is everything. And it was like, but there's also this cute guy who, like, if I really practice guitar, then I'll just be like that much more impressive. So yeah, that opened that different gate and kind of gave me a different thing to like focus on a little bit too. So I wasn't quite as gung ho as I kind of intended to be at the beginning. Yeah.
So did you end up being that gung ho as a teenager? Like as you started getting older, maybe getting more, I don't know, here people often drive at like 16 and get some measure of freedom. Like did you start to get more freedom over time as you went through your teenage years? And did you exercise? Maybe some of it was to go see him or whatever. I don't know. But also, did you start participating more in those other witness activities?
Definitely. It kind of went in phases. So basically, this brother and I secretly, once I got into the same high school that he was a year older, but we were in the same high school, ninth and 10th grade. We secretly started dating for like 2 years at school. Um, so especially in my sophomore year, I was like kind of, I mean, I was performatively trying to maintain the appearance of like, because I also at that point was just very, I knew the formula of what was expected of me. So it wasn't difficult to try to kind of hide the other stuff that was going on in my life with still being very pious and active. But during those years, it wasn't as genuine. I was definitely like more interested in trying to like secretly date this person. And had like a couple teachers my sophomore year that like one went on maternity leave and they never replaced the teacher. They just like brought in a substitute every day for like almost the entire year. And so we just like watched videos every day. And so like I had a lot of like unengaging classes, which I was super studious and I loved school. And so to have like no teacher and no guidance and no direction, no homework, I was just bored. And so that's when I started like cutting class. And this guy and I would go to like Guitar Center and he would steal Valium from his dad and we'd like take pills and go play guitar in the middle of the day. So that was kind of I kind of went through a little bit of a double life phase during that time. So we kept that up for about 2 years. And then the most embarrassing thing in the entire world happened. His family was over for dinner and we'd all been sitting at the dining room table. I got up to go upstairs to go to the bathroom. When I came back, what had happened was this guy had left a half naked photo of me on his phone on the dinner table, open. This guy was not super bright. So his family and my family all became aware all at once.
Ooh.
Of what was happening. So we got in trouble. You know, they made us go talk to the elders. I definitely had it I think a lot worse than him.
Because you sent the photo?
Well, I sent the photo, and I feel like in general, like being an elder's daughter, like his dad was like sometimes a ministerial servant. And so there was a way higher expectation of me. I was always a lot more vocal and active and engaged. Like he would just kind of like look kind of disheveled and like grunt into the microphone now and then. So they didn't really discipline him much. But I had a pretty traumatic talking to with all of the just the worst, most interrogative questions.
So you had a full judicial committee?
Yes,
So
I had a
you
full
had to
judicial
sit in front
committee.
of 3 elders at how old?
I was, I think 15, 16.
So 15, 16 in front of 3 men discussing your private life, um, by yourself, or was there anybody else there? Other than the elders, obviously.
Nope, I was alone.
Okay.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
doesn't seem healthy from an outside perspective.
No, asking, you know, just really prying, creepy questions about sexual pleasure in a 15-year-old girl it's pretty gross.
It's abusive.
Very abusive. It was definitely traumatic for me. They, let's see. Trying to remember the timeline. I think that actually happened when I was a little bit older. That was when I was more like 17.
Okay.
Now that I think about it, so we had gotten in trouble before. Okay. I'm going to back up real quick. The photo happened a little bit later on. The first time it happened was the first friend that was my same age. She went to the same high school. And I think she got jealous that I was spending so much time with him. And she saw us kissing in the hallway one day. And so she wrote my father a letter saying, your daughter is kissing this guy at school. She doesn't seem repentant. I'm worried for her salvation. You need to do something about it. And he read that at the dinner table. And I've never seen my dad get so angry.
He read it at the dinner table. In other words, like you and your family were eating dinner. He breaks it out to
He
share with
stands up.
everyone to
He's like,
humiliate you.
I have something to read. I got a very interesting letter today, Taylor. I'd like to read it to you all.
And
And
how
he
is that
read,
anything but just a power play?
oh, it's totally a power play. It's the only time my dad ever did anything like this. He stood up, he was pounding his fist on the table and yelling at me. Like, basically, he called me a whore and said, you're going to be barefoot and pregnant alone on the side of the street if you keep this up. Like, it went from like, I'm like, I just had my first kiss and now I'm a whore and getting pregnant. Like, it was just such an intense overreaction. It was the first moment I realized, like, oh, I'm no longer daddy's little girl. I'm now a woman and something to be feared and regulated and asserted power over.
And women are whores.
And women are
Right.
whores
Like,
for kissing.
that's the first word we're going to here. And I wonder if he was as upset with your male counterpart in that instance.
Yeah, once again, I think they just had lower expectations of him. They just expected that he was going to be a little weirdo or something,
Yeah,
And
you were the golden girl, so to speak, the golden child, the one who was doing all the right things, and they had high hopes for, even though hopes for a witness woman are not very high.
Yeah, there's some seriously high expectations that, the moment I started trying to have something for myself, that was just too much of a threat. So yeah, I had to meet with the elders about the kiss. They did form a judicial committee. I did not get reproved or anything. But the next time with the photo, they did reprove me. So I get them mixed up a little because I went through, and it was the same brothers in both of those judicial committees over the course of like 3 years. And in the middle of that, I started pioneering. So the timeline's a little funky. I very much vacillated through high school and my teenage years. I think I was very confused about having parts of my personality that didn't come from being a Jehovah's Witness. It was like having attraction to someone was like, it was the first thing that was just mine and just came from me. And I think I was just as confused by it as everyone else, but I also didn't have anyone to talk to about it. Like, as you can see, my friends were the first people to rat me out. And, like after the photo thing, I mean, his family treated me like a whore. I ended up switching congregations because of it. I felt so much shame in a way that I don't think he was made to feel, and I don't think he felt. Maybe he did. I don't know. It was hurtful for both of us, but yeah, I think that that was the beginning of kind of this inner conflict of like, oh no, I'm going to have my own like wants and desires that might not come from the right place. And I'm going to have to deal with the way it feels to like try to gaslight myself out of things I actually want. Because I built so much of my young personality over just wanting the things I was allowed. So becoming a teenager was really brutal that way, because it was a massive awakening to how real all of this stuff was. So
Yeah, you're
yeah,
finally discovering yourself, right? You're discovering who Taylor is and what
like, oh
Taylor
no.
might want out of life instead of the pre-programmed identity that Jehovah's Witnesses gave you. You're
Mhm.
realizing, well, maybe I want some things that aren't in line with this identity in all ways, and how do I, it's the cognitive dissonance of how I hold this thing to be true, but now there's this other part of me that's coming up, and I can't make these two fit. Something's incongruent here.
Hmm.
And so I'm going to have to gaslight myself to get rid of the secondary thing, which is actually you, in order to fit
Yep.
into the primary narrative, which is the one that the cult gives us. Um, so that's a really, I'm so sorry that you had to endure that. I mean, not just the two meetings, but I think, obviously the picture thing, and then the way your dad conducted himself over the letter, just standing there, that's your people, that's your family. And having them react in this way in front of where it's exposed to everyone too. There's no privacy here. It's like it's everybody's business. There's no boundaries. This is very it's just gross. That's not how that needs to be handled.
Yeah, exactly. And so it kind of forced me into this like vacillation between, trying to kind of have enough of a double life that I could have something for myself, and then, still continuing to go and sit at all the meetings and really listening to what they were saying and taking it in, and then like just carrying that guilt and shame for knowing that I wasn't achieving perfection in the way I was supposed to. So like after the whole kiss incident, we broke up for a while. I started auxiliary pioneering a ton. I got really close with his sister. She was pioneering and older and drove. So I kind of put off driving myself because my parents had this like, I think it was like a Plymouth Voyager minivan that was going to be like the car for me if I started driving. And I knew that the moment I started driving, I was just going to have to drive my brother to school and stuff. So I was like, I have older friends. I'm just going to let them drive me around. And then I also don't have to like pay for gas and stuff. I started working when I was 14, so I had the money, but then I got to like go do fun stuff because I didn't have any bills I needed to pay. So, um, yeah, I just lost my train of thought.
So you pioneered with and his sister.
Yep. Yeah, his older sister. So we did a lot of that. We actually we kind of around the age of 16, when I was recommitted and trying to like not be flirty with this guy, but he was still in and around because we were all, there's only so many Jehovah's Witness kids like um so we kind of grew in our group of young people. Like we were meeting each other, like a lot of us, because we were so motivated and pioneering and stuff, we would like sometimes go to like a second convention in the summer to like hear Brother Let give a talk, to see a governing body member give a talk. And so then it also like we'd be able to widen our social group a little bit because of all of the young people would be at that convention, lived in a different place. So, you know, there was always, for my youth, we went to the Cow Palace in San Francisco for our conventions. And there's a lower ring walk around the stadium, and then there's an upper ring walk. And so it was like very much the culture where, you know, you just commit to walking a circle, and then other groups would like walk the opposite. And so you'd get to meet twice along. And so you could kind of like eye people and like check people out and like kind of be like, should we, you know, try to engage with other people? This is a weird way to make friends.
Oh, I totally understand that culture. We had Freedom Hall in Louisville, and it was a ring upstairs and a ring down, you know, on the main level, and yeah, that's what people did.
Oh, and you wore like your best clothes and your highest heels,
Oh
and
yeah.
you know, have like a very nice like book bag that clearly showed you carried a lot of books. Like I'm a I'm a I'm an extra sister. Look at all the books I carry, but still wear high heels. You know, I can do everything. Um,
Y'all were
weird
just
culture.
trolling the hallways looking for a guy with a big briefcase.
Exactly. Books.
Because
Bring
look
on
how
those
spiritual
books.
he is. He's got the double briefcase with all the books.
And then if he has an attendant part on his
Oh
badge,
yes.
that means someone thinks he's special.
Yes.
Uh,
Funny.
so yeah, we would go to these other conventions. So we grew our social circle, and we ended up making friends with a lot of other older but still young kids that were like active pioneers. Some were ex-Bethelites. Like we grew in like the intensity of our spiritual circle. And so we actually made a friend who um he we had a very weird relationship. I had a couple relationships when I was young where there was kind of some grooming behavior. Um, it kind of played out a little bit later, but he was like 6 years older than me. So when I was 16, he was 22, and you know, but he was like a cool ex-Bethelite ministerial servant guy, and he would like skateboard and listen to punk music, but he'd like take all the kids out in service in like Berkeley and San Francisco. We'd like go in the middle of the night and like street witness in the middle of the night, and it was like we can be cool and have fun too and still be like cool preacher people. um so he actually, we were kind of building a relationship, which was strange, but he ended up meeting with my parents to convince them to let me to go to Europe with that other friend that was a little older than me. They didn't listen to me, but he just thought it was such a great idea. They like listened to him. His ex-Bethelite is like, this would be such an enriching experience. She'll be able to see the witnesses in a different part of the world. Like, so he talked them into that. So I actually got to backpack around Europe when I was 16 with a 21-year-old, just the two of us, inexperienced little Jehovah's Witness girls. We went to 4 different countries. It was wild and super cool. We went to like a meeting in Italy, I think, and then we visited the branch in Madrid. So we still kind of, you know, did spiritual things. But so that was a point where like I was doing all the right things again, and it seemed like I had redeemed myself from this like fall from grace. So
Mhm.
I think my parents were like very willing to encourage anything I did that was going to like keep me on the right path. So then when the photo thing happened, that was like, I think for them it felt just like a slap in the face, like wait a second, like you've clearly been keeping stuff from us. Um so so things were a lot more difficult for a while after that, and I kind of fell into Well, that happened. And then the relationship with that other brother, who was 6 years older than me, grew. That was kind of how I was trying to like work through being reproved. And so he knew that I wanted to pioneer, and I was going out in service a ton, basically doing pioneer hours as a reproved person, just to show that like I was that repentant, you know. And he ended up getting sent, or he ended up moving to Saipan to you know, preach over there. And he had basically told me like, well, as soon as you turn 18, then I can come back and we can date and get married, because he wanted to go to Gilead and I wanted to go to Gilead. And so we're like, we can be missionaries. And then after he left, we stayed in touch for a little bit, and he would call and I get so excited. My little 16-year-old heart was just like overflowing. I really thought, you know, Jehovah is offering me this opportunity. Like he doesn't hate me for what I've done, for the mistakes I've made. Like he's going to reward me with like all of the stuff I've worked for, with being able to achieve the success I want. And then he ended up calling me one day and saying, hey, I just want to let you know, like, I regret ever being friends with you. I regret knowing you or talking to you. I take it all back, and I never want to see or talk to you again. Click.
Why?
I have a feeling his
that came out of
mom.
nowhere, or that came after like the photo or something, or what?
No, because I don't think he even knew about that. Like, not really. Like, he knew that I was reproved and that I had been struggling, but that I was like working to get it back. So it wasn't about that. I think his mom probably put pressure on him to be like, you shouldn't be communicating with a 16-year-old while you're serving in another country. It almost
sounds like at some point he got busted talking to much younger people, and
which,
maybe there was
like, fair.
and maybe there were others that he was talking to besides yourself, and maybe he was doing damage control.
Yeah, you know, to this day, I don't really know exactly what happened, but, you know, I had been holding on to the validation of that relationship as like a signal that even though I didn't have my privileges back, that like God forgave me. And the tricky part about my privileges was like, because the family of the guy I got in trouble with was so, I mean, they made the meetings intolerable. Like the way they would look at me was unbearable. So I switched congregations. And so I started going by myself to a different congregation.
Wait a minute.
And
you started going by yourself to another congregation? Your parents didn't come with you?
No, I went alone.
Your parents didn't support you and like come with and be there for their daughter?
My dad was an elder in that hall. They didn't want to switch. He felt the responsibility.
They move all the time.
He felt this, like, I mean, part of the excuse was like, well, you know, we're supposed to stay in the territory. We're in the Martinez group, so we have to be here. And so
yes, his hands weren't tied.
I mean, I think he was angry with me. Yeah. I think, and he wanted to punish me. Yeah. And part of my punishment was having to do it all on my own without much support. And it was super isolating. And I mean, once again, I made the best of it, you know. Yeah. There's actually another one of the ex-brothers that you've interviewed on this podcast was in that congregation that I moved to. And so that's when Jeff, yes.
I don't remember what episode that is, but he had gone to China, for anyone who is wanting to listen to one.
Yep. Yeah. He, we grew up right parallel. We've known each other for 20, 25 years. So he was always in that. They're basically like, there were 3 congregations in the Kingdom Hall. 2 always were in the same circuit and paired together, but 1 was always in a different circuit. So there was kind of like, there were a lot of young kids, younger people, and pioneers, like a lot of young pioneers in that congregation, but they always went to a different circuit assembly. So we were never as close to that group. So that was the one I decided to go to because people knew me the least, and I felt like I would have the most fresh start. Plus, they had a ton of like Jeff and all of our friends in that hall, which a lot have left since then, which is super cool. But we were all like they were all pioneering, and so I felt like this is where I can kind of get a fresh start and re-engage, get on back on the right path. Like I said, I was going out in service as much as the auxiliary pioneers, just without being able to be called one because of the loss of privileges. But there was a brother who's assigned to my committee in that hall, which, right, like when you get reproved in one hall and then you switch halls, not only do they like send a letter telling them everything that went down, but then like you have to have another meeting, like an introduction, get to know you as a reproved person meeting with those elders. So I then had to like tell it all to them all over again. And they asked more inappropriate questions. And there was one particular brother on my committee in that hall that was super creepy. And he would say a lot of weird things about like his wife and daughter and like his marriage, and try to kind of like compare our situations in weird ways. And it was like, he ended up like basically, I kept asking to try to get my privileges back. I'm like, I'm putting in auxiliary pioneer hours. I'm coming to the meeting studied and ready. Like, even though I can't comment, I'm ready to comment on any paragraph. Like, I'm not talking to this brother anymore. I've segregated, I've moved congregations. Like, I've completely changed my life. I am completely repentant of this. And he did this thing where he kept, like, we would set up meetings so that we could talk about reinstating my privileges, and he would keep canceling or not showing up at the last minute. Like, he was in my book study group and they had made an appointment to meet there just because the other brothers were like, we're dragging this out. There's no reason to drag this out. She's doing great. Like, let's give her her privileges back. We want her back in full standing. And once again, like for like the 7th or 8th time, he just didn't show up. He kept trying to make it so they didn't have enough brothers. And so one of the other brothers that I was super close to, who's the conductor, he was that night, he was like, forget this. We're just going to do this. Like, you've been working so hard. There's no reason to draw this out. Like, I think he kind of recognized that the brother was being over the top and like just using his power to continue to manipulate my life. So I finally got my privileges back, which was great.
Yeah, did you ever find out why that brother was manipulating your life like that? Did anything ever come of it?
No, I mean, I'm pretty sure he's still in that hall.
That is
I think he's
super
still
weird. I
there.
mean, was he projecting because something, someone had done something in his life and he was unhappy, and so he's punishing you like he wanted to punish somebody else? Or was he trying to keep you in a certain position of vulnerability because he had his own weird designs in some way? That's weird.
Yeah, it was
Very strange.
very strange. There were a lot of like those moments where I would make myself really vulnerable to like the authority of the elders, and they would like so intensely abuse that vulnerability and that trust to like such extreme degrees, it still like just kind of blows me away how, especially like, I mean, I was a kid still. I'd been raised in it. Everyone knew my family. Like, they knew I wasn't a bad person. I was just like a normal
Maybe you had
teenager.
beef with your dad or something.
Yeah, some like
There's a lot of
weird.
weird stuff that goes on in the elders meetings and behind the scenes. It's a lot of weirdness.
I very much believe that. Yeah, the weird comments that he would make about his wife, like that he was like unhappy in his marriage and he regretted getting married and stuff. Like he would tell me weird things in like our weird little,
Inappropriate.
super inappropriate, like super inappropriate. And not all the brothers were like that. A lot of them were like, you could tell they were uncomfortable with having to ask these weird questions. It didn't stop them. Um, and, you know, once they got warmed up, they got more into it, which is also creepy. But you could tell certain brothers were uncomfortable with like asking all of these really probing questions. But then you could always tell the ones that were like enjoying the power and
Mm.
um
But why
yeah.
even ask them? Well, just because you're switching kingdom halls, you're switching congregations, like you're going to get this letter of recommendation, or this letter, maybe it's not recommending, but this letter that's going to follow you from your old elder body. It's going to have details in it. There is absolutely no reason to subject you to another meeting other than power and control.
Yeah, and it was like, yeah, different cultures and different congregations too. Sometimes you don't know, like you get used to the way one congregation does things and comfortable with the brothers, and then you go to another one and it's kind of jarring, like because to them that's the way they do things and it's super normal, but you also don't feel allowed to question it. This just describes this vacillation, this back and forth, you know, like trying really hard and then kind of giving myself some space to try to find myself. I did go through like a little dark phase where I dyed my hair black, and right after I got reproved, I kind of disconnected pretty hard and kind of stopped going to meetings a little bit right before I kind of like really started showing up at that hall. And yeah, I kind of forgot to mention that part, that like the timeline of this is so
For sure.
it's so muddy.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And there's a
telling
lot of
it in
moving
order
pieces
is,
to it, and there's a lot of things that probably happen alongside each other, and um,
yeah.
probably wasn't a super. It's probably somewhat of a dark time in life too, and kind of hard to remember based on just the fact that it was all kind of traumatic in its own ways.
Yeah, I mean that that fall from grace, especially with the elders, like having looked up to them and idolized them so much and like really wanting to be in their position so badly, um to then try to swallow them seeing me as a whore, instead of that devoted little girl, adoring and devoted. That was that was very traumatic for me. And you know, teenage years are rough emotionally, anyways. Like all of the hormones, all of the stuff. So I did kind of go through a phase where I was like fully rebelling and not really going to the meetings. I still like was very double lifing it. Um, but there was another sister in one of the other congregations who was also kind of struggling. She started working at the movie theater in the town where we lived, and started kind of hanging out with this worldly guy. And so then there was another worldly guy that I would kind of hang out with, and he would do like the movie reels, switch the movie reels in the upstairs room. And so like we'd go mess around up there. And unfortunately, I put myself in a situation where I let him in my house when my parents were out, and he raped me. And then I found out that he not only was much older, but had a wife and a kid.
Wow.
So that was something that I didn't tell anybody about. I held it in, and I think that then when I started going back, I like dyed my hair back to my natural color and reaffirmed and recommitted. That was the thing that scared me. You know, it was like, oh no, if I stray too far away from this organization, the world really is going to hurt me. And it just kind of validated all the stuff I'd been taught in a really unhealthy way. And so I held it all in, and then just tried to be as perfect as possible, to be right with God. And yeah, that was a heavy burden to carry, and it kind of shaped the way I moved forward pretty heavily. I think yeah, it definitely pushed me back in the truth, and back very, very intensely staunch about the truth. So
Well, I mean, I can see why in several ways. I mean, first of all, I'm so sorry that happened to you. That's horrible. Um, I can also see that why that would reinforce, of course, everything you've been taught about worldly people, right? It's so unsafe to be out there in the world outside of Jehovah's Witnesses. Um, you already had this fall from grace. So actually, I was kind of thinking about that. That's kind of a weird. I don't know where that phrase comes from. I need to look that up because, um, honestly, aren't they supposed to have grace? Like, aren't they supposed to? You messed up, and isn't grace part of forgiving you and trying to understand who you are and where you come from? That's the exact opposite of what you got. Instead, it's just accusations and stuff to try to make you feel bad. Now, this has happened that uh, certainly has no bearing on who you are, as far as like just because something bad happened to you does not reinforce the names and the labels they were referring to you as. But like, I'm sure that, I mean, at that time it may have, and just made you feel even worse about yourself. And I can totally understand maybe just being like, I'm just gonna go put on this other identity that I had before and live in that denial and act like everything is fine.
yes, denial was definitely my tool of choice at
Sure.
that point in time. And
Well, where is it gonna be safe for you to address this?
well, exactly. And the only safe way for me to address it was to go back and re-engage. In the world that I knew, I didn't have real resources. Like the other girl that was also kind of hanging out with this worldly guy. I mean, he assaulted her very violently, and it was a secret that kind of we shared, was um that, that we, because she was also another sister who was, from a very devout family. I think she got baptized when she was like 8 years old. She started pioneering right away. Like, she was kind of that prodigy child. And so, and she's a few years older than me. And so us having these parallel experiences, yeah, it really, like, that was the only other place I could go, to someone who was knowing and understanding of where I was at and that I was struggling with stuff, but she also had that bad experience. And so neither of us really, we didn't have, we were not good resources for one another, and we didn't have any other resources. So yeah, we both just kind of jumped back in. And I mean, I went, especially once I got my privileges back, I went whole hog. Like
Of
I,
course.
yeah, I mean, I dropped out of high school early. I tested out in the middle of my junior year to pioneer. Um, I, because I very much wanted to go to college always, but I knew that wasn't going to be an option for me. Like, my parents were so discouraging of it, which is so sad because my dad has like his master's. And once again, like I looked up to him, and it was just like, in the truth, I couldn't do what he did and follow his example. In the world, I couldn't do it either. Like there there were just, there were so many fucked up boundaries to everywhere I tried to set a goal. It was like became just unachievable.
You can see it just lets you down at every twist and turn.
Yeah,
Even going back to what happened to you with that guy, you know, they fail you once again because they've now made it so unsafe that you cannot report to them. Not
yeah,
that they're the people you should report to anyway, but like you now are even more isolated because you've got this thing. You can't tell anybody, even that you were hurt. I was actually doing some research yesterday because well, I don't know. People will find out, I guess, but I'm building my own XJW cart. And
hell yeah.
and
That's
I've already
awesome.
got it ready to go. And so at the top it says, "What do Jehovah's Witnesses really teach about?" And then I have three different sections, and one of them is about women. So, what do they really teach about women, about children, and then about you as the person approaching the cart? And so I was researching the part about women, and I read from one of their publications where rape can be seen as fornication, and you can get in trouble for it based on the circumstances around it, and then how long it takes you to report. Like, what the hell? How do you not A, understand the trauma of that, but B, understand that, like, why would it be safe to tell you this? And
Exactly.
it's just again, the witnesses are just not a safe place for women. What we've talked about already a lot of ways, like it's just not a healthy place for anybody, but also for women in particular in certain ways. And that just blew me away. I had not seen that particular quote before, and I was just like, what is this? I mean, I knew that these judicial committees could get out of hand, and I knew that people had been reproved for being raped and stuff, but I did
Hmm.
not realize that like they would just see it almost as the equivalent of fornication based on the specifics that were laid out there. Yeah, how can it ever be safe to report what has happened to you to the very people that are supposed to be the people who are ride or die, who are going to go through that great tribulation with you in the concentration camps, and you're going to give your lives up for each other to save one another, but yet you're not even safe enough to talk to when you've been hurt.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's
So
like
messed up.
Medusa, right? It was
Yeah.
like, Athena is ultimately the one who threw her under the bus, even though she was another woman, and forced her to be this like horrifying creature that ended up, essentially making a man more successful at being a hero by killing her. Like there's there's a lot there's so much history of like throwing women under the bus makes certain men feel powerful. And yeah, those were very thick, difficult lessons that, I mean, I didn't process when they happened.
Sure.
Like obviously in those moments, I gaslit myself out of all of those emotions. I I carried the guilt and shame so heavily, knowing that then I had this secret. So then I had to be that much more performative. But instead of like when I was a kid, it came from such a genuine place. After that happened, it definitely, I tried to make it come from that place, but that place had been tainted so much that it really affected the way I was able to be genuine. And it did become a lot more about just the performance of it. And so, I mean, like after I dyed my hair, the dyeing my hair thing was like, obviously it's just the most visible symbol. And it made a great illustration. And so, I was able to use that choice and say, I had black hair and I dyed it back. The narrative I told was I was sitting in the Kingdom Hall one day and I realized that the kind of black that I had dyed my hair looked purple under the fluorescent lights. And I felt the most out of place sitting in the Kingdom Hall that I had ever felt. And it dawned upon me that, like, this is the place where I want to fit in the most. And right now I fit in the least. And so that was what touched my heart and pushed me to decide to, I told my mom, because my mom hated my black hair. You're like so gothic. I'm like, yeah, because I'm sad. That makes sense, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and but I went to her and was like, hey mom, like, would you help me dye my hair back to my natural color? And I got fawned over for that. She took me to a really nice salon and I got these highlights put in my hair so it looked more natural. And then, I would use that narrative in my comments in the meetings, and it became this narrative that that got pushed so far that, like, it got me to share the experience on the district convention. I started being then used as this example and like put on this pedestal because I had made this holier than thou decision with my life and like had, my come to Jesus moment.
Because you
And they could,
changed the color of your hair.
and it was this like very just good kind of metaphorical symbol
Mhm.
of that performative recommitment that made just a perfect advertisement for any teenager that was thinking about, rebelling or having a double life. It was like I just became this kind of poster child for successfully making the right decision. So um that kind of stoked me back into a much more spiritually active place. Um Pioneered a bunch, was being used on district conventions and circuit assemblies, and you know super active with all that stuff. um
How
yeah
did that feel good, as far as being on the conventions and the assemblies and such, as a little girl who wanted to give these talks and such? Maybe you were never able to give like a public talk, a 45-minute talk, or I guess 30, whatever they do today. But did it feel good to be back on those platforms, or on those platforms maybe for the first time? I mean, a convention, that's a big deal.
Yeah, no, I absolutely loved it. It totally fed the parts of me that were missing. I
Sure.
mean, because it's that approval, right? To like,
Mhm.
and once you're on like a circuit or district assembly, especially when you're not just doing like a demo, but you're actually giving your own personal experience, especially about turning around from the world as a young person, um, you get recycled a lot and used a lot. So like your name is in the pot now. And so there were brothers that just decided they liked me from like congregations that were way far away, and they would consistently use me on their parts to do the demonstrations, to do like the Bible reading comments, to do like anything that they could grab me to do. I then, when I lived in California, I was in on that stuff. So that, I mean, I loved that. And because while I was good at faking the ministry. Like, I was like, I had like maybe a couple Bible studies that like were very much not much and never went anywhere. I was not successful at converting anyone or really convincing anyone of anything. Um, but I was really good at looking like I was really good at the ministry. So, like, all of my talks and experiences about my time in the ministry, I mean, I was just really good at reframing everything to be like very sound, very humble, but be shining a positive light on myself. And I think a lot of that had to do with the guilt and shame that I was carrying. And I felt like the more positive light I can shine on myself, the more it's going to like erase this darkness that I'm carrying, and make me feel less guilty. Because like, I mean, every time there was a talk about like, if there's something that you've done and you haven't repented, remember like Jehovah knows and he's going to hold you accountable. So if you think that you can just not tell people, you're not going to be able to get away with it with Jehovah. And so that terror really that really lived inside of me pretty heavily, but I kind of was able to push it away and manage it by being so busy as a Jehovah's Witness.
That really makes me think of the the fact that a lot of the most vociferous defenders of Jehovah's Witnesses online are often people who were never even baptized. And
Yeah.
they're people who are carrying guilt around for their life, holding it against the bright shining light of the witnesses as they see it, because they clearly do still identify with the witnesses.
Hmm.
And because of that guilt and shame, they're overcorrecting and throwing and shining light on, instead of themselves, they're doing it on the witnesses, trying to get just a little reflection of that light, I think, on themselves so they can
Yeah.
feel a little bit better. And I can totally understand. I mean, chasing, trying to chase that shame away, that secret. Oh, they have those talks about the secret sins and like how things would come out. You'd be, there was a elder who was giving a talk at the congregation, and Jehovah's Holy Spirit made him reveal from the platform that he was cheating on his wife. And it's like, wow, you're just always afraid you're gonna slip up and something's gonna come out that you don't want to say, because God's gonna make you say it in front of everybody, which you've already experienced being shamed on that level to some degree. It's
Mhm.
terrifying.
Yeah. And I mean, a lot of people who don't understand how coercive control groups, high control groups, function and how they brainwash people. It's all of those very subtle things where, in the beginning they don't start your indoctrination with this kind of stuff. This comes once you've already put so much in that, to take it back you then have to acknowledge that, like, there's going to be this emptiness now where you put all this energy into something, and especially, you know, at the point where you're raised in it. And like, I made so many sacrifices in my childhood and in my young adulthood to be the best Jehovah's Witness I could possibly be, that then to, you know, be real and give it all up just felt, you know, it feels like too much. And that's part of the mechanism of controlling, keeping you there, is like, what is it, the sunk cost
Cost fallacy,
fallacy?
yeah.
Yeah, where you just put in so much that
You have to keep putting in more. I can't walk away now. Look at how, you know, I've already put $5,000 worth of repairs on this car that's worth $2,000 if I were to sell it today, and now it needs a transmission. Well, I got to go buy a transmission for it, right? Because I already
yep.
put $5,000 in it. Well, now I have $10,000 in a car that's worth $2,000. That's not necessarily a great decision.
Yeah, and if you are, you know, believing that this God is monitoring your every thought, desire, emotion, then, I mean, you feel terrified to be honest with yourself about having wrong emotions or desires. And I mean, that came up in so many parts of my life too. Like, a part I haven't really mentioned is that I came out as queer a few years ago. And when I was young, I had a couple experiences where I had, you know, experiences with girls. And I also went through a lot of tomboy phases. And there was a lot of shaming for that sort of thing too. Like, if I if I put my hands in my pockets while I was walking around, my mom would just like, she'd try to rip my hands out of my pockets, like, stop walking like a boy. You're not a boy. You're a girl. And then she'd just like huff and puff at me sometimes, just like, I really hope you don't become a lesbian. I just really, really hope you don't. And so it was just like, I would just hate that. That would just be the worst. So I mean, there were so many layers of these messages that are like, if you even think about this, if you even feel this emotion, like, God's gonna know, and he's like, it's gonna come out in some terrifyingly embarrassing way. And I mean, the amount of times I had things come out in embarrassing ways, like, I was trying so hard to avoid that outcome for anything, and it just kept happening no matter what. So so yeah, I got, you know, at a certain point I was very like, I have to just do everything right, which is why at a certain point, that's when I decided to get married at 19, because I was like, I'm going to have sex before I get married if I don't get married. Like, it's just going to happen, and then like all of this stuff is going to happen all over again. Like, I felt like I just had to do myself a favor and just take this thing off of my plate and not have to worry about it. And I felt like, if that's, because that seemed to be my only major issue, was my sexuality was only the only thing I ever did wrong. And so it was like, if I just take this off of my table, then I can just be clean and good with God, and like free of these terrible temptations and desires that, like, I'm constantly like, the moment and edge of it kind of comes up inside of your mind or your heart. It's like the fear of it existing, and just like the fear of the judgment of God, and that it might come out, like, that emotional internal manipulation was just like unbearable. So yeah. Then
The
I got
fear
married
of
when I
your
was
own
19.
sexuality. How healthy. You know, that's
Yeah.
just another byproduct of Jehovah's Witnesses.
It's like literally how we even have people. And how is it
Yes,
like the
yes,
worst thing
yes.
when
It's
it's
really the
like,
way Jehovah's Witnesses grow at this point is by having children. Um,
exactly.
so, so you ended up getting married at 19. Was this to the person you had known previously, or did you have a new relationship with someone, like maybe from your new congregation or something?
Nope, he was actually from so I was in the Bay Area. He was from coastal Oregon.
Hmm.
So I had so the friend, my first friend who wasn't very nice to me, she and a bunch of other uh mostly girls, but so there was one brother that had moved up to coastal Oregon. Um and so all of his friends would go up and visit and hang out. I think a lot of them were pioneering. So it was kind of under the guise of that, but like, they're visiting their friends. And so a lot of the girls, including my friend growing up, um, from California ended up marrying guys from coastal Oregon. Um, the bubble was pretty small in California, and a lot of us had all grown up there, so we knew everybody, and it was like you just knew that there weren't any options. Plus, like as we were getting older, you know,
Well, I mean, you were
19
19.
all the way to 19 and weren't like betrothed to anyone. And we knew that like, the pickings were going to get more and more slim. So you better
Yep.
kind of hurry it on up.
Yep.
So all these girls were going up to Oregon and getting married. And I made a vow. I was like, I will not do two things. I will not move to Oregon and I will not marry a brother from Oregon. I went up for a wedding and my friend who I was then going to be staying with, um, I was a vegetarian, like a pretty militant one. And there was another brother who lived up there who was also a vegetarian. And so my friend was like, Taylor's coming for this wedding. She's going to stay here. Like, I want you guys to meet. And so he made sure that he was at the house when I came back from the wedding. So that's how we met. We dated long distance. I think we met in like January, February. We got engaged in July and married in December.
Mm.
So that progressed really quick. It was kind of one of those things where we were both like, we should definitely get married soon so we can take this temptation off of our plates. He was a very, like, on the outside, a very happy, bubbly person. That's how he was known to everyone. He was super sweet, got along with everybody, super different than any of the other guys I had ever been interested in, which I kind of then saw as a positive sign, like that I was growing and moving on. And so yeah, we had a pretty short engagement and got married, and I moved up to coastal Oregon with him for about 9 months, and then we moved up to Northwest Washington. Very shortly after that, my parents had moved up there, so we followed my parents up there. So then we ended up back in my parents' congregation in Northwest Washington. So yeah, then it was like back to the pressure and like me feeling like I had to kind of live up to the certain standard. But then I had, a husband, a head of household. I had, and his family was very different than my family. Like, he didn't have two parents who were in the truth together. He had a mom that was a witness, but
Mhm.
dad who was not. His dad, sweet man, but the heavy alcoholic. I believe he was like raised around the witnesses. but never got baptized. So I'm sure he probably was just traumatized by it.
Probably.
And never had the opportunity to really learn how to express himself. So he was like very quiet. He internalized everything. He was a very sad, unhealthy, unfortunately, person who's really struggled a lot in life. And his mom kind of did a lot of the compensating for, you know, her husband not being super strong, kind of in any part of life. And so she was a lot. She was a lot. Very intrusive, very loud, um, very frustrating person. So I think, you know, my ex-husband, he grew up in this tiny coastal town and he'd always lived there. And so like moving with me to Bellingham and then getting close to my family was like kind of a respite, I think, for him because he tried. And like when I met him, he was really trying to be a super spiritual person, but um, that wasn't like a supernatural thing for him. So, um, you know, it put a pretty heavy strain on our relationship and, you know, kind of created a really unfortunate dynamic because, you know, once again, especially in the presence of my father, there's a lot of expectations for me to be like meeting these very high expectations. But then there's also this other level where now I've married someone who is my head, who um, is not. It's like I hate saying this out loud because it's so cringy, but he wasn't at my level,
Oh, sure.
you know,
As
and
far as the witnesses go.
yeah, in this stupid hierarchy
Sure.
of bullshit. You know, he wasn't always keeping up. And so
Which as a head, as the brother, the man in the of the house, you are supposed you know, there's the pressure there to be taking the lead and all of that. And if you're not
mhm.
that person, then it sometimes causes a lack of respect.
Yeah. So they pushed me really, really hard to try to constantly be pushing and pushing and pushing him. Um, so at one point, I want to say like 4 years, 3 years, 4 years into our relationship, we joined a American Sign Language group that was forming in our congregation. And so that was kind of a way to like change the focus for both of us a little bit. And I feel like it gave him the opportunity to kind of like because we were new at something, so then he kind of got a respite for being like not perfect at everything. He
Mhm.
got the opportunity to be a beginner
Well, it kinda
again.
knocked everybody to the same level, so to speak, because now
Mhm.
you're both trying to learn this thing from the ground up, right?
Exactly. And so it kind of it was almost like this restart where I kind of feel like it offered him the opportunity to like if he was going to step up, that's how he could really step up. And you know, at first he was like really taking to it and enjoying it and you know, we were having a lot of fun with it. It was fun learning a new language. Um um but I was starting to kind of outpace him in the language and my ability to also connect it to spiritual things. And then we both, our grandfathers died within a month of each other. And that put kind of a wedge in our relationship, I think. We had very different relationships with our grandfathers, and it kind of, there was some resentment building there. His grandfather was a Jehovah's Witness. And he was super close to him. He had lived with him a little bit when he was a kid, like, and, you know, in our head, he now had a hope of resurrection, right?
Mhm.
My grandfather was not a Jehovah's Witness. It was my dad's father. And he died super unexpectedly, and it was a huge blow. And because he wasn't a Jehovah's Witness, the process of grieving for me was really confused because, you know, especially my dad and I, we really bonded over that experience of loss. And I think because we went to this non-Jehovah's Witness, like, he was a veteran too. So they did like the whole folding the flag and everything at his funeral, which is so like felt so wrong as a Jehovah's Witness. And I think we both were really hurting because it wasn't it wasn't representative of our relationship with him. So there was that layer. And then there was the layer of like, we're not really allowed to be all that sad or grieve because we have this hope that now, like, this actually saved his life in a way because he was going to die in Armageddon. And now he has the opportunity to be resurrected. So there was this like, we kind of both gaslit each other out of feeling allowed to feel our grief over it. Um, so then, so then with my husband at the time, like also going through this really intense grief. The thing I didn't know or realize at that time either was that 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 his grief became a catalyst for him remembering some really tough stuff about his childhood and some really bad abuse that he had totally repressed that was now becoming extremely vivid. And he really started, I mean, he just internalized it all and he wouldn't talk about it. I remember just begging him, just say it out loud, just tell me what's going on. And he couldn't let it out. And so the way I coped with this wedge in our relationship was to just completely refocus and reinvest in being a Jehovah's Witness. Now I was in the sign language group, so I had that much more. So I pioneered in the ASL group. I got to go to pioneer school in ASL. I was an interpreter for the meetings really regularly. I was being used constantly. Like anytime in English or ASL, anybody canceled a talk last minute, I would jump in with 5 minutes notice and give the talk. Like I was doing absolutely everything I could as a woman to completely try to compensate for the fact that like I couldn't help my husband. Nobody could help my husband. He wasn't willing to talk about it and he wouldn't show it to other people. And so, and I wasn't like going to go tell on him either. So then the brothers are just constantly putting pressure on me. Like, you need to encourage your husband. They would come to me like I needed to counsel my husband. Like his suit was really wrinkly today. You really should take care of that and like make sure that doesn't happen again. Like you don't want your head of household to be representing you this way. Um, it was
You're the
wild.
woman, grab an iron. That's
Exactly.
basically what they're saying. Like, that's
Exactly.
horrible.
Like,
Wow. That is
yeah,
so ew. That's so gross.
yeah,
And I mean, again, he's a person who is needing some help, and there's not really any effective help around there either.
no, no, it was,
Because all they want you to do is what you seem to be doing is every time trauma happens or something happens that's bad, double down, right?
Yep.
Back to the meetings, which is what they tell you to do.
Mhm.
Then if you're hurting, invest yourself more in service to Jehovah. Go to the meetings, prepare more, comment more, go out and service and knock on more doors. That is the answer for everything.
Yep.
Escaping the
Absolutely. Yep. It yeah, and I mean, it just leaves you so emotionally abandoned.
Mhm.
Um, I I mean, I was spiraling in my own way, you know, like he was over here spiraling about like really big things in his life that he was reckoning with and had no words for it. He didn't have anywhere to go to feel safe to talk about it. Not even to his wife could he talk about this stuff with. So and knowing how lonely he was feeling in it, and that there was nothing I could do like to make it better. I just kept trying to say like, okay, I just have to be like the best Jehovah's Witness wife. That's the only thing I know how to do to help this person. So I just I got very stuck in this spiral of like pushing him and trying to like encourage him to want to be accountable for this stuff. And I mean, it hurt him a lot, and it really dissolved, you know, anything that had been healthy in our relationship really dissolved in that process. And so there were a lot of parts of it that just were then feeling really wrong and not good. But then you're not allowed to like get divorced or separate, you know, unless there's cheating or death. Um, I mean, it was getting to the point where I was actually having dreams. It was so bad, but I was having dreams that he would die, and I in the dreams I would be sad, like I would grieve, and I'd just be distraught. But then at the end, I could like then go on living my life in with freedom,
Mhm.
and um you know, and it was, I'd wake up and just be horrified that I had just dreamt that. Like I was terrified of my subconscious allowing myself to feel the like the need to run. But of course also he could feel that that was happening too. Like I couldn't completely hide the way I was feeling. And so, you know, he started hiding, drinking. Um, you know, there was a time where I came home from babysitting and I followed a trail of blood into our spare room, and his head was gashed open and he was passed out and I couldn't wake him up. Fortunately, my friend in the hall at that time was a nurse, and I had some safety with her. We had built a relationship that was like we were able to kind of acknowledge some uncomfortable things,
Mhm.
some actual realities. We were slowly allowing ourselves to kind of open up about how things really were, especially in our marriages. And so I was able to call her and ask for her help. She would call me in the middle of the night with her own stuff too, with her husband. So it was a very dark time, and I did find out later that he made a couple attempts at suicide in our house while I was out babysitting, that I almost came home to. So yeah, things got really dark really quickly, and I just kept pioneering and interpreting on the stage for the meetings and being concerned about all the counsel. I was constantly counseled like your hat, because you had to wear a head covering to interpret for sign language, because sign language specifically, there's no direct English to ASL translation, there's this implied, like, you have to interpret, not translate.
So
So
you're
if you're a
teaching.
sister, you're teaching and you have to wear a head covering. So then I had to make sure they had this rule for ASL interpreters that your head covering has to match your outfit. It can't, because they use the example of, like, you can't just put a napkin on your head. That's like disrespectful to God, right? Like, there's only one way to do things. So yeah, I was constantly like, your hat doesn't really match your outfit tonight. So I was just getting, I'm just spinning the wheels in all this really tedious bullshit and just trying, and then, trying to drag this man alongside me. And I'm like, all this just so I wouldn't get disfellowship for having sex. Like, wow.
Yeah, it may, really a lot of this makes me think, have you ever seen the Book of Mormon play?
I haven't. No, I want to see it though.
There's a song in there, one of the ones that really stood out to me about when you have uncomfortable feelings, just turn them off like a light switch. Just go click. It's a cool little Mormon trick. And that is kind of how it is. It's like you
Yep.
have these feelings that come up, they're uncomfortable. Just turn them off, ignore them. Just it'll be fine, and you just move along and you keep doing what you're doing because you're doing the right things. And it really makes us deny our feelings. And then, it makes us sometimes push other people in ways that, like, we're almost really pushing them to deny theirs. And because we're now wanting them to push just like we are, because isn't this what we're supposed to do with a fake plastered smile on our face? I mean, this is how you make it through to the new system where then you can finally be happy. It's really sad.
Yeah, no, I full on turned into like a Jehovah's Witness Stepford wife.
Sure.
And I constantly felt like I was losing too, because, there's having a dad who's an elder, and, my mom's married to an elder. Most of the sisters in the hall that I was pioneering with and super close to, their husbands were elders. So there was also the social aspect of, like, constantly feeling left out and left behind because, they would want to go on couples trips, and they, often, and dinners and stuff, and they would often limit it to just elders and elders' wives. And so even though I was friends and, like, my parents are close friends with my friends, they're all getting together, but then I'm not getting invited because, I'm dragging my husband along and he's just fucking miserable. There was just like, no matter how hard I tried to achieve perfection, it wasn't going to happen at that point. So I think my ex-husband's guilt in seeing how it was affecting me got to be too much for him. And so he ended up essentially cheating on me to, like, free me from the relationship. So it was, and free himself, honestly, from the constant pressure of me, like, trying to dig into him and trying to, like, push him. It was unbearable for both of us. I feel quite grateful, honestly, for him doing that for me, because then he was wanting to leave then at that point, and it offered me the opportunity to stay, in kind of full standing with the opportunity to remarry, because I wasn't the wrong party. So he kind of did me that favor.
Oh, I get it. The whole thing's weird. I mean, this cheating to get out of the relationship is what a lot of people end up doing, because well, I mean, like, he could cheat to get out of the relationship. He could cheat, you could move forward, and then depending on how he cheats, sometimes, you may just get reproved, right? You're not
Hmm.
always gonna get disfellowship for that, but you could still get divorced.
Yep.
So, I don't know, the pressure around it all is really intense, and
Mm.
it's just so messed up. You can't just walk away from something that you don't wanna be in anymore. You're not free.
Yep. Exactly. So that it freed him to leave,
Mhm,
which I think was good for him.
mhm.
Obviously, staying in wasn't helping him. And then it allowed me the opportunity to kind of move on. And so I tried. I kept pioneering. Um, Moved into my parents' basement for a little bit. Um, really, I was really trying, but there had just been so much that had happened and so much unprocessed trauma at that point that um, it was really starting to like eat me alive. Um, and so let's see. So after that, oh yeah. So I mean, I was hardcore struggling. I was super depressed.
Well, sure.
Um, like pioneering was just feeling terrible. Like I started acknowledging to myself that I hated it, um, that I did not enjoy any of this, and that so then my faith started getting a little wobbly, and so I did what I knew I was supposed to do, and I asked the elders to have a meeting with me, kind of like shepherding call style. Um, so even though it wasn't a judicial committee, three brothers showed up to this meeting. And one of them was so the sister that I was getting close to in the congregation, who I was feeling like the safety with. And I
Mhm.
was also hearing a lot about her relationship with her husband in ways that he didn't know. He invaded my meeting with the elders, my little shepherding call. He asked to be in it, which was a red flag to begin with.
Mhm.
And so I will say, like, I pretended to pray a lot growing up. Like, I was never very good at actually praying. Like, sometimes I'd get into it and I'd divulge and I'd really do it. But the majority of the time, I had this kind of like inner formula, as like as long as I cross all these things off the checklist, then like I'm good. But before this meeting, I prayed the hardest I'd ever prayed. I was like, all right, here I am, Jehovah. Like, I'm doing I'm doing everything that I'm supposed to be doing, and things are just terrible. And like, so here I am. I trust that the brothers have your Holy Spirit, that they are your representation on earth, that when I ask the questions I need to ask, I will get answers from you. So I'm here, I'm listening. Please help me. I go into this meeting, and this is also like, it's hard to talk about, but the dynamics in my marriage had gotten really unhealthy, and like I said before, I didn't feel like I had anywhere to like go to like ask difficult questions, and I really put the trust in these brothers to like be able to give me God's answer. And so I was like, things weren't good. Like in my marriage, there was stuff going on behind the scenes that like didn't feel good. And I have a question. And like, is it possible to feel like you got raped when you're married? And I didn't realize how inappropriate of a question that was to ask three suited men. Um, Obviously, the context of my life told me that that was the safe place to ask that question.
Sure.
I I also want to say too that like ultimately when I look back now, I don't think that was the right question to ask. I didn't necessarily feel that way about my marriage, but I think I was trying to process like feeling forced to stay in a marriage that I didn't want to stay in, and like almost trying to ask like, how is it okay to force people to stay in marriages when things aren't genuine? And like how is that okay? I think would have been like would be the way I would want to ask the question in hindsight.
Mm-hmm.
But that is the question I asked. And so the brother that invited himself into that meeting, who was my friend's husband, he there's like a pause and he looks at me and he goes, well, I'm going to answer your question with another question. There's a brother in the congregation who's making it very known that he has a crush on you. And I just want to let you know that it is completely unacceptable for you to be flirting with this brother before you are even legally divorced. And I was like, well, that didn't answer my question. And that also wasn't a question.
So you're not here to help me. You are here and to answer my questions. You are here to condemn me or to warn me, to put me in my place.
Yes.
Wow.
And it was like, I called that meeting. That wasn't a meeting they called. I called that meeting. I sat out there and asked Jehovah to give me an answer. And I feel very grateful that that is the answer I got, because it was the first thing that really clicked and was like, oh, hold on. Wait a second. Like, maybe God's Holy Spirit is not here. And it was the very first time I ever allowed myself to have that thought. And I was like, if God's Holy Spirit isn't here, then I am safe to question this, because God's not reading my mind and he's not expecting me to stay in this crazy religion. Like, so then everything just started peeling apart. And I actually then, to kind of double, because I was always about to double down, I doubled down and I called my dad one day after this friend had called me about a situation with her husband that was like not okay. I called my dad up and I was like, all right, this brother is like mistreating his wife. He's hiding it. He's prominent in the congregation. He does the Watchtower study. Like, how can you allow a man who is behind the scenes doing this shit to then be one of the most celebrated, prominent elders in the congregation? Like, hey, dad, this is happening. I'm handing this to you. You need to do something about it. You need to advocate for my friend, because it's not okay that she's constantly getting swept under the rug under his prominence. And he's not having to be accountable for the way he really is. He's just constantly being celebrated because he's a good speaker. Like, you need to hold him accountable. And he did nothing. And that was kind of my double down, and seeing like even my father listening to his daughter come to him in earnest and say there's mistreatment of power. He wasn't going to do anything about it. And I was like, yeah, Holy Spirit definitely not here. I don't know much. I don't know if like the Bible stuff is true. So I started doing some research and really seeing it for what it was. Started kind of exploring the outside world a little bit and actually talking to people who are not Jehovah's Witnesses about some of this stuff. And just really then finally seeing that, like, you know, this is a closed circuit. You know, you've been stuck in a loop, and there is a lot outside of the loop. So I started getting tattooed secretly and started dating a tattoo artist. And then I kept trying to go to meetings, and just kind of like, I didn't know how, you know, it's so overwhelming, like just being so close to my family. You know, my little brother had just gotten married and was like really depending on me for like emotional support. I felt like if I leave, I'm then abandoning him. I'm abandoning all my friends. Like, even my friend who I've gotten close to, now I'm going to have to abandon her. Um, it just felt like an impossible decision. So I tried to just kind of hold it for a hot second and just kind of explore the outside and do this other kind of lame ass double life thing for a minute. And the thing that started happening was, uh, there became this voice in my head that I was like not even in control of. Like, I'd be sitting in the meeting, and I would just have this reel playing in my head that said, "You're a fake, run away. You're a fake, run away." And it wouldn't, I'd try to stuff it down and I couldn't. It's all I could hear. My heart would just be pounding as I'm sitting there. And I had these urges to just run out of the door as fast as I possibly could. And I held it for months. We were going on a family vacation, and I was like, I want to go and at least have this one last thing to spend time with my family before they find out, and before, you know, I maybe never hear from them again. So went on the trip, came back. And so then I made another meeting with the elders, and 4 showed up to this one. It was super special. I got
We
all
need
the fun
more Holy
attention.
Spirit here for this one.
And so I came to that meeting with like, all right, I'm going to throw down that, like, I'm losing my faith, and I just want to see what they say. Like, I want to see what they do with telling them that I don't think Holy Spirit is here, that I want to tell them about the mismanagement of power. I want to tell them about why I'm losing my faith, because a lot of it is based on their actions and inactions. So I sat down and I like laid it all out, and we went in circles for 3 hours. We were down there, and they were just like, kept just being like, but Taylor, we can rebuild your faith together. Let's just start you back at the beginning. Like, we'll get you studying with like a sister that you really love, like in the Bible storybook. They just went immediately to infantilization.
Double down and infantilize.
And I was like, at that point, I was like livid. I was like, I have read the insight books back to back. I bring an interlinear translation to the meeting with me every single meeting. I interpret these meetings. I understand these concepts more than most because I can interpret them into another language that is communicated through pictures. Like, I cannot go back to the Bible storybook and expect that to change anything. You are just running me in circles. And I realized in that moment, I was like, the real crime here is that I'm not allowed to lose my faith. I'm not allowed to question. That's the biggest sin of all, is the questioning. And that's what I realized. I had been gaslighting myself out of my entire life, was like, no, 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 because the worst thing I could possibly do was to question whether God was reading my thoughts, question whether the elders had this authority over me because they had this Holy Spirit from God. And it was just in that moment, it was so blatantly clear, but I could tell that like they didn't have any more power, once I didn't have the faith. And so in that moment, I felt my power. And so I just looked them all in the eye and I was like, okay, so I'm going to make this super easy for you because I can tell we are going nowhere. I'm going to tell you the things I know you need to hear from me to finish this. I have a worldly boyfriend. I'm having sex with him. I don't feel sorry about it, and I'm not going to stop. And then they were like, well, then I guess you know what we have to do. And it was just like they were sheepish and small. And like, these are all my dad's friends. Like, they just were so tiny in that moment. And so I was like, then I guess we're done here. They were like, well, you know, we have to disfellowship you. I'm like, yeah, that's what I told you. I told you all of the magic words so that you can do the thing you need to do. So go for it. Enjoy. And I got up and I turned around and I went like that and I walked out the door. And I have never walked back into Kingdom Hall.
That's a way to leave right there.
Yeah. I got
Wow.
mad. I got mad.
Wow, the biggest crime is questioning. It truly is. My
I thought it
parents,
was sex.
yeah, I was gonna say my parents would rather I murdered someone or cheated on my wife than that I just think it's all bullshit.
I was like, I'm not allowed to be here and
Yeah.
have my family if I don't believe this.
Yeah.
That's the only real crime. So
Yes.
there's nothing left to do because I can't force myself into believing this anymore. It's just not happening. Like I am sitting with this incessant voice in my head that I can't get rid of. And I knew like you're faking it. You're a fake. Run
Mhm.
away. Like get the fuck out of there. It was like everything in my body knew that it was just time and it happened all at once. And it was terrible. I mean, it felt awful. Like it felt
Mhm.
super liberating and I was super proud of myself. Especially in hindsight, but it's then I mean then it stoked the darkest, time in my life because then I realized like, well, I had to move out of my parents' house and get my own apartment. Um, I lived alone. I was so depressed. I mean, there were like weeks where I couldn't get out of bed. And like I realized like I have to now deal with the fact that I'm going to die. And I'm now realizing that my entire life, my parents have always pushed off dealing with that by saying, like Taylor, you're never going to even graduate high school. This new system's going to come before then. You're never going to drink alcohol, so you don't have to worry about this. Like it's never like you're not even going to meet these like adult milestones because it's so close. So like the last thing that I ever considered was that I was going to have to die. So all of that fascination with all of that revelation imagery came back and really haunted me for a while. That was definitely the darkest period of time in my life. The peeling it all back and starting to see it for what it was and having to deal with all of these new realities. But then I found black metal and it helped me process that anger. And so I was able to have an outlet and a healthy relationship for that. So yeah, it's just been great since then.
Well,
That's 10 years ago.
I I have a lot of people that know that I disassociated, and people see people asking online about disassociation and such, and sometimes people will ask me in my coaching practice or whatever, and because at the end of that's kind of what you ended up doing. You decided in that moment to put that bullet in it. um it's not really easy even when you do it. It's one of those things that I don't think you're ever truly ready for. It's something that you're now fighting your back up against some sort of a proverbial wall, and now here, this is the time to do it, or you just know in your heart you need to do this to protect yourself, or whatever the case may be.
Mm-hmm.
And it is, I guess I just wanted to point out, it's like just what you did there. Like, it doesn't mean that there's not going to be dark times on the other side of it for a little bit. It doesn't
Mm-hmm.
mean that as soon as you do it, it's sunshine and rainbows. It means that you're now going to have to deal with the reality that everything that you are stepping out of, and everyone who is now choosing to stay behind, um, it really didn't have a lot of substance to it. You have to deal with that. You have to grieve for everything that you've lost. You have to grieve for all the hopes and dreams that you had that are never going to be a reality because they never were. And you have to grieve now that you're in this world around you that you don't understand, and you feel like you've been dropped from another planet into it, and you feel behind in all of these ways and stunted. And it's just, you have to start not just from ground zero, I don't know, from somewhere in the negatives, and you have to like rebuild everything, or build everything for the first time at a
Yeah.
later point in life, with all of these realities crashing down on you. It's not easy. It is worth it ultimately, but it is not easy.
Yeah. I mean, I've never been so proud of myself for like going with my gut and um taking action. Like it's definitely, I mean, it's the hardest thing I've ever done, and I've done a lot of really difficult things in my life. um and yeah, like you said, it the leaving part is like, it's the hardest big moment and big decision you have to make, because also what you're inviting now is like all of the grief and healing that you now have. You have a new journey, and it's a painful one. And if you continue to like shove things down and not deal with them and do the things that you learned how to do as a Jehovah's Witness or from a cultic group, like, and continue to shove that stuff down post decision, then you just defer longer and longer and create more and more suffering for yourself. So it feels like being, between a rock and a hard place. It's there's no, like, leaving is liberating in a lot of ways, and I'm so glad I did it. Like, I would never want to make any other decision now. But um you go through moments too where you are like, was this is such a steep learning curve, and this is so painful. Like, was this really worth it? Like, could I have just suffered a lot less in my life if I just stayed? And like, the thing, when I told my parents, I went over to their house for dinner. They didn't expect to hear what they were going to hear. And, I just said, I got to be honest with you guys that like, I'm leaving. I'm done. I'm getting disfellowshipped, and I don't plan on coming back. Like, I'm done with this. And I mean, my mom screamed, like, they both cried like crazy.
Screamed at you, or just screamed in like,
They
oh,
screamed at me, and then kind of like to God, "Oh, God, why have you done this to us?" And in my dad's kind of distraught state, he was doing a lot of bargaining with me in that moment, and was like, well, like, Taylor, like, I still laugh about this to this day. Taylor, like, you always just went so hard at everything. You were always just doing so much. Like, if it was too much, why couldn't you have just done less? Like, you could have just like gone to the meetings and not commented a ton. You didn't have to do sign language. Like, you didn't have to be on the district convention. You didn't have to pioneer. And I'm just like, are you fucking kidding me? Like, I was under the impression that the expectation for me was to be the best Jehovah's Witness I could be. I tried to be the best Jehovah's Witness I could be. And my dad goes, Taylor, you were the best Jehovah's Witness. And I was like, and it's been killing me. So I have to go, and I'm sorry. But like, and that just blew me away. Like, why couldn't you have done less? Like, was that an option? I was not aware that that was an option.
I get
You
it.
told me that as a kid?
You
Come
really,
on.
in those instances, sometimes you see how they really think about things. I had a conversation with my mom before we left. We had gone and seen a movie. We were sitting in this restaurant, my wife, myself, and my mom. And my mom, I was questioning some things, and my mom was like, "Oh, honey, I don't believe everything." And I was like, what the hell? You made me believe it all. You told me I had to believe it all. How come you get to walk around selectively enforcing what parts of the truth are true enough for you and what parts are false? But when
Yep.
I question them, I'm an apostate.
Yep.
How come you get to question them and you're not an apostate? But if I question them, I'm an apostate.
Yep.
And that just helped me to see again just how they make it work for themselves the way they need it to work for themselves. That helps them escape in the way that they're escaping, much like you were escaping the way you're escaping. And it goes back to that. We have that shelf that we put things up on that don't make sense to us. And then hopefully someday the weight limit will be surpassed of that shelf. It will come crashing down like it did for you and me and others. And then you start to see it for what it really is. It's just a
Yep.
pile of junk on a shelf. And it wasn't, none of this was, it was all imaginary, just like the shelf. And,
Yep.
but for a lot of those people, they have made the truth their own. It fits who they are. They've made it their own, and they don't even bother putting stuff on the shelf.
Yeah, I mean, I think
Take
that
it or leave it.
that phrase is really funny to like look back on because, being raised in it, I always, the way it's explained is like you make the truth your own. Like, this doctrine
Mhm.
becomes your doctrine.
Yeah, it's you.
I make the truth my own. So I now have to become this doctrine.
Mhm.
But I think it's funny that what it really means is that you find a way to make it work for you.
Yes.
Um, because it's also like, for a lot of people, it's survival. And, that's kind of where my brother ended up. He was super hurt by me leaving. And I want to say he shunned me for about a year, which was devastating. It was probably the hardest person to be shunned by was my little brother. But about a year after I left, he texted me and was like, hey, like, I just don't feel good about this. This doesn't feel right. Like, I don't feel right not talking to you. Like, I want you in my life. You're important to me. Like, our relationship means more than anything. Like, I don't really believe this stuff anyway. I don't know why I'm I'm complying. And I mean, it was kind of news to me. Like, I knew that he was never super connected to it, but I didn't realize that he didn't believe it. He had never said that out loud before. So he did the fade over a long period of time. I went out with my middle fingers up. So we definitely very much have those different personalities, but
Hey, yeah, nothing wrong with, get out how you get out.
Yep.
and we should all celebrate it. And if the middle finger in the air is the way you get out, then go out that way. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. And if you need to fade for yourself, then fade, or whatever you've got to
Mhm.
do, just get out.
Yep. Yeah.
Be healthy.
Yeah. So he's finally out too.
That's
And
awesome. Glad you got
yeah,
to reconnect too.
it's wonderful. I'm so glad to have him back. Yeah.
So were there any so you left under the circumstances you left under, uh you talked about looking into the Bible a little bit yourself or whatever, but like were there things that helped you to wake up to the realities of exactly what you were in, other than like that this isn't Holy Spirit? Like did you start going through your own research journey or something like that?
Definitely. I think the flood doctrine was the first one that even before that meeting, I was like, okay, wait a second, let's think this out. Like, let's let me apply what I actually know about science, and then let's read this again. And then, I started rereading the Bible without the aid of the literature. And I got a couple different translations of the Bible and read them side by side. So I could also see the discrepancies between the New World Translation and other translations. Um, and, the one of the first things I recognized too is that there are two Garden of Eden, Adam and Eve stories right next to each other in Genesis. And it blew me away that like it's the first couple books of the Bible. How many times have I read these books? Like I've probably read Genesis 2 like 2,000 times in my life. And I've never noticed that there are two conflicting Garden of Eden stories right next to each other that describe the formation of woman in two completely different ways. And it was just like, hold on a second. I haven't really like, even though I have studied the Bible, like my big study size Bible was full, full of like notes that I'd written from convention and memorial and special parts, like highlighted to no end. Like I studied everything so much. And I was like, I've never actually really read the Bible. And that just blew my mind. I was like, I have been completely dependent on their doctrine, interpreting a book to the point to where even as I read the words of the Bible, I'm only hearing what they're telling me it means.
Yep.
So like, not only are these doctrines most likely incorrect in the larger scheme of things, but they're not even doing the one thing they say they do well. And that, I mean, that just really kind of blew my mind and made me realize like I've been depending on a doctrine instead of doing it for myself. So I kind of, instead of really picking apart all of the specific Jehovah's Witness doctrines, because I also recognize that I was so indoctrinated in the language of Jehovah's Witnesses that anytime I read like the Watchtower or like listened to a talk, I couldn't hear. There was like a thing in my brain I realized where it I was just agreeable to it and I couldn't critically think about it. So I was like, you know what? I don't think it's going to be helpful to try to pick this apart because I'm so indoctrinated in this. It's like soothing and comfortable to me. It feels like home and safety. And I know logically that that is not the case. So I went the other direction and just started studying other religions and recognizing. I tried to see the bigger picture and kind of go backwards and reason like, how could this tiny little group of people who are like not even interpreting the Bible well, how are then all of these other people who also believe the same thing about their religions, how is this so in conflict? Like, what are they believing? What is their perspective? So I kind of dove more into other religious perspectives so that I could kind of slowly unindoctrinate myself and be able to like distance myself from the voices of governing body members and um, that language. It just totally put my brain to sleep. So I needed space from it to be able to hear it from a more objective place.
Well, it goes all the way back to where we started. Your dad is a very intelligent chemical engineer, and yet this doctrine was soothing to him in some way. And because of that, he can't look at it objectively, and he can't use his logical mind to think things through.
Yep.
But it is soothing him, providing salve for something. There's some way in there it's putting him to sleep, which is why oftentimes we talk about waking up on the other side of things, right? And
Mm-hmm.
this is kind of interesting the way you describe that. It's like, yeah, that's probably your dad to some degree, as far as the way that he views the truth. There's something there for him, and maybe he has a hard time looking at the realities because it's the way that the brother presented it when faced with the arguments from the angry evolutionists.
Yep. Yeah. And my brother and I have had many conversations since then about like, are you confused as to how dad could like be so bought into this? Like, does this make sense to you? Like, no, it doesn't make sense to me either. And like, do you think that like if something happened to mom and she wasn't around anymore, do you think dad would stay in? And like, I question, especially with the rest of his family out. Um, at this point, it almost kind of feels like he's staying in for her. Like he's stuck in. He's sunk so much cost into.
It could be. I fully felt that my mom would leave when my dad died, and yet there she is.
Well, and that's the other thing is like as he gets older, it's harder. I mean, I can't imagine like the brain breaking I've had to go through to like unindoctrinate myself. Like, I feel really grateful that I was 25 when I left and I still had, so much of life to potentially look forward to. I knew that if I turned it around then, I still had a lot of time. I could imagine that at a later age, it would feel less and less worth it. Like, in a way, like
The
you've,
people that
like,
I've spoken to who have left at a later age are just happy to have left and
yeah,
happy to have seen it. I think it's kind of would you rather spend your entire life in prison or have that one day free before you died? And I think most people would like to feel freedom for a minute at least.
yeah,
But that's not to negate how difficult it is. And then there's the whole resurrection hope. I think that my mom probably has, that to some degree. She hopes she'll see my dad again in paradise. So there's
hmm
that emotional pull too, that's not always reasonable because it's just grief and big emotions. And it's just it's really, really, they have their hooks in people in so many different ways.
they do. And I mean, it takes a lot of, um, it takes a lot of bravery, but it also takes a lot of like embracing chaos,
Hmm.
to be willing to like put yourself through the process of deprogramming your your entire life from being in something like that. And especially being born and raised in it, it's the foundation of my brain. Like some of the first things I said were, like, where's Jehovah live? You point
Yep.
up there, and like, like it's it's and like I described earlier, like it was so much of the foundation of my personality my likes and dislikes were all centered around this group. And, you know, all of my life goals, all of my aspirations, every choice I had made was under the lens or through the lens of living that life. So, I mean, then you also have to deal with like, well, not just like what am I going to do now, but like who the fuck am I? Because I've repressed who I really am for so long. I have so much built up shame and guilt for every little moment it started to show. Um yeah, it's a lot. It's a lot of work. I mean, I've been out 10 years and there are things that I feel like I'm just now starting to heal. And I feel like it will be a lifelong process to and like, you know, there might be wounds that never heal. But I feel like the more I'm able to at least understand it, like understand why um you know, that attachment stuff with my family was the way it was. And I've had the opportunity of talking to them, and I kind of laid into them one time. I called them up, and um once I could wrap my head around the fact that I had in fact endured abuse, um and that they were essentially negligent in protecting me from that abuse. um I felt like I had to say something to them. My anger really compelled me to act and to try to hold them accountable. Um, and you know, I expressed to them, you know, like I love and appreciate the fact that you did everything that you felt like you knew how to do. Like you used all of the tools that you had in your tool belt to try to help support me and raise me with love and with structure and with um you know, stability. um but unfortunately, the way that happened was actually abusive. And like, I need to say this to you because they would often like blame the dissolution of my marriage as like they really wanted to hold on to that and say that was why I left, because I think it was then easier to picture me coming back.
Oh yeah, they always have some convenient reason that you left.
It was just like, oh, you know, we just blame ourselves so much. We shouldn't have let you get married so young. That's our fault. Like, we know that all of this has happened now. We didn't know. We didn't know you were unhappy in your marriage, Taylor. Why didn't you just come to us?
Which
And it was
just shows
like,
they think you're a robot they can control, not an individual.
exactly. I'm like, you are completely missing the point. Like, I made all of these choices for your approval. And guess what? I still never really had it. And I was miserable at the same time. So I just had to give up at a certain point and do it for myself. And I couldn't do it for myself here because there were legitimate things that were hurting me. And I'm not a stupid person. You don't hang out around the people that hurt you if you want to start healing. Like, I couldn't be here anymore because, like, I mean, I brought up, Dad, I called you about what was happening with this sister, and you refused to hold this brother accountable. In fact, is he still an elder? Does he still do the watchtower, Dad?
Yeah.
Well, he's still in a position of authority. And there's no wonder that, like, Jehovah's Witnesses are being put in courts right now because they have not been holding men in positions of authority accountable. So, like, I'm lucky that like I only had the experience I had. There are lots of people who were even more poorly mistreated by the elders in way more fucked up situations. Like, in a way, I got out okay, but this is me surviving. I could not thrive there, guys. Like, but they, you know, they weren't able to hold accountability. I also came out to them as queer, and that my mom screamed again. It's just like so shrill. I was like, no,
The
the
reaction
worst
that
thing.
everyone wants, from a parent.
It was almost
Mom,
hilarious.
this is me. No, like
That's the thing. I always wish you wouldn't be like, my
so
fears are coming true.
so much support.
Yeah, it's just like, oh
So
yeah,
support.
just everything about my life is just about you guys, I guess.
Yep.
Like,
Yes, because
like,
it's
fuck
all
me.
seen as a reflection of who they are because they didn't control you enough. The narcissist is always concerned about, just like the cult, it's always a concerned about appearances and what other people will think if you are who you are of them as a reflection.
Yep, exactly. So, that was really freeing for me to like have that conversation and confront them and just almost kind of like lay it back out like this is who I am.
Mhm.
And that Taylor that you miss and appreciated and looked up to, that Taylor was a fake Taylor and this is the real Taylor. Because I feel like they were really stuck in like, when's the real Taylor going to come back? Like, this is just, Satan's got a hold of her. This isn't the real Taylor. I think they really struggled to believe that this was real. And so, yeah, I mean, like, shaving my head and getting a lot of tattoos, definitely, I think for me was, almost like reclaiming that stupid hair comment I made at the convention. You know what? I can be a good person and have funny hair. Like,
You can do whatever you want and what you like, and it doesn't matter
it doesn't matter.
as long as you're
So,
not
yeah,
hurting anybody else. Um,
exactly.
well, so then what do you like about your life today now that you're out? What's good in the land of Taylor?
Oh Lord. So much. I love my life. It's carrying this story around for the last decade has been a wild opening experience for me. The more I tell my story, the more I learn about my story just by saying it out loud. Um, I've been able to kind of, I don't know, get to know myself. And, I recently, earlier this year, I've been living in Seattle, Washington for like 11 years. And that was where I escaped to after I left, Jehovah's Witnesses. I moved to Seattle and started a whole fresh life, started brewing beer, started doing just very different stuff, getting into metal. And this year I decided that I wanted to drive across the country. So um, I knew I still had just more healing that needed to happen. So, and I wanted to refocus my life from like working for other people to working for myself. So I have reclaimed my creativity. I use my creativity now to help support other people in their grieving process. So I have like a card deck I made about grief. I'm working on one about coercive control mechanisms. Um, so I just feel so full in my ability to be able to like connect with my true feelings and be able to express myself in a genuine way. That's been the most liberating part of life. And, it's living without your family and, without all those friends, living without, this community that's kind of always there, like living without the structure. It's difficult a lot of the time. And it's been hard to like create that for myself. But doing therapy and counseling with you and, you know, just really being in the work has brought back so much joy to my life, because I'm able to, like, instead of just pushing down all of the bad feelings to try to only feel the good feelings, I can now hold the bad and the good together in a way that makes me like appreciate the hard stuff, because I mean, that's evidence that you're living. Because you know, there's a good and a bad, a light and a dark side to everything. And like, the more I'm able to hold space for both of those things at the same time, the easier it's just been to like live in my own skin. So um yeah, I'm I still study the Bible just in a very different way now.
Sure.
I'm
Yeah.
yeah, I'm kind of I still like I love research. Being a Jehovah's
Because
Witness
Taylor,
taught me
that's
to love
you,
it. It
right?
is me.
That's you. You love research. Yeah, the witnesses gave you certain things to research, but that was just a part of you that you can see looking back. Like, I mean, I was around that. I hated research, and that wasn't my thing. And even today, I'm not a person. I mean, I do. I've learned to like it more, but it didn't come natural for me. That's a natural part of who Taylor is, right? And so now you can take it and apply it in the areas that you're passionate about, figuring out what those are. Can I ask? I just I would forget if I don't. Do you have like I know you mentioned your grief deck, you know, the cards that you've made and such. Do you have a website or something where people might go to see them?
Yeah, I've got an Instagram handle, and I'm at Moth and Moon Community,
Okay.
all one word. It's my sign back there, Moth
No
and Moon.
no underscores, just at Moth and Moon Community, one word.
Yep, Moth and Moon Community is
Okay.
my little business name. It started off as a coffee and donut shop,
Mhm.
uh, right before 2020 happened, and then I had to shut that down. But I've kind of changed it and repurposed it post 2020 into mostly art focused and grief support business. So I do like um, working on building some classes for people to like make their own grief decks, to do some grief support, hopefully groups, hopefully in person and online. And then yeah, the physicality of the cards. I do markets, and that tends to be really great because people just see the big word grief and they're like, the people who are interested tend to you know, and then I just get to hear amazing stories. And it's so much of it for me is this process of healing where I feel like I've accomplished so much in my ability to heal over time and reclaim my life truly for myself, that it feels like the right time to like try to bring that outward and help others, because you know, in the post cult, post Jehovah's Witness communities and in our larger, you know, cultural communities, we don't deal with grief very well. We don't really talk about it. We don't make it a celebrated natural part of life. We tend to do the pushing it down thing. So um yeah, I volunteer with the Center for Grieving Children up in Portland, Maine. I've learned a ton about just like holding quiet space, and instead of doing the things we did it as Jehovah's Witnesses, where as you're listening to the person, you're trying to like in the index of your brain, like find the right response that will persuade them into your perspective. I've learned reflective listening, which is just simply acknowledging what the person has said and is might be feeling, and then asking, you know, if there's anything else that they want to share, and just creating a safe space where there can also just be silence. It doesn't have to be this like very, like I just think about the Watchtower, um, how like we used to think that that was like us studying and learning together. And it's just like, you remember that like one weird person that would like raise their hand and ask a question in the middle of the Watchtower
Yes.
study? And
Yes.
everyone's
Freaked
like,
everybody out.
what have they done? You're not supposed to do that. It's just like the most awkward thing ever. You're like, oh no, how is he going to handle this? Because that was the thing. It was like, this isn't a space where you ask questions. This is a space where you recite the answers back. We sit and we regurgitate.
Yep.
And so building spaces that are the exact opposite of that is what I'm very interested in doing. So
Well, I'll be sure and link to your Instagram in the description, both on the podcast and on YouTube. And I know I've seen your cards. You've shown me some of them, and I think they're a really cool tool to use for that. So, and I like that you know, are interested in getting in there and helping other people to build their own grief decks so that they can learn how to process grief specifically as they're building these decks. I think that's a really cool idea. So I'll be sure and share that.
yeah, imagery, my fascination with,
Art.
art and like the Revelation book, definitely. I actually have a little painting here too I wanted to share. That's it's
Oh,
in
very
weird
cool.
letters, but it's a shunning painting. Silence is at the top. But yeah, this is kind of my rough draft for the coercive control deck. It's going to be very kind of like dark and ominous religious imagery, but talking about coercive structures and picking them apart.
They
And
are dark and ominous.
they are, which I love. So I
Well,
get pleasure
and
out of it now.
just like those pictures that you were looking at in the Revelation book, you know, they seem scary, but the reality is they're just figments of our imagination. They're just these things that we're involved in. They don't really have any power unless we attribute it to them. We can learn how to move outside of that.
And that's the beautiful part about making them yourself
Hmm.
and allowing that dark stuff to come out and live on a page, is that it shows you that like you have the power
Hmm.
over
You create it.
that. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's empowering for sure.
Well, Taylor, I appreciate you sharing your story, and I hope that it empowers you to listen back to it as well as part of you, you know, in your own grief journey, right, and your own processing of all of this. And I
Hmm.
know your story will help others to do that with their own stories.
I sure hope so. It's not easy to say it all at once, but it does feel really good. And yeah, if it helps support others, that's everything.
Oh, absolutely. And saying it all at once when this is released, you will have an encapsulation of your story in one place that you can go back to and have it start to finish, so to speak, or at least to where you are today. So it's a
Yeah.
really kind of cool time capsule as well. So I'm sure you'll find it interesting when the time comes. And I appreciate you participating because I know that you know, it takes time to do this, and it's also a very vulnerable thing. But on the flip side of that, you'll get really good things from doing so.
Yeah. No, I really appreciate the platform to be able to tell the story. And, you know, since I've been working with you as a coach for a while, this is just kind of a continuation of the last couple years. And you've definitely helped me bring this story together. And the more I say it out loud, the more, especially with another ear, someone else who's been through similar stuff and understands um the nuances. And like when I say certain things about my dad being an elder, like, knowing that that's what that means, is it really creates a safe space to feel heard and to like face my own emotions with myself. So definitely, anyone who's feeling like they want to tell their story, it's definitely liberating. Holding stuff in.
Denial doesn't help. You either own your
No.
story or your story owns you. So And of course, it's a pleasure that I've had to work with you, throughout all of this. So, yeah, thank you very much. And I hope others again will maybe check out some of your cards as well, because I know you do some fun things and some cool things. There's a lot of ways to heal in the process of all of this, and it all does involve us getting involved with our story. So this is yet another.
It's true. Yeah. Thank you so much. I appreciate you.